Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 243 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy here with Dave Park, and our guest on tonight's show is the author of Common Sense Leadership Matters. This is book 3 in the series, Toxic Leadership Destroys by Pete Blaber. Pete served as an officer in Ranger Battalion and then in Delta Force, and has gone on to have a successful career after the military. And we're really excited to have him here on the show to talk about his series of books and his career, especially his most recent book, which is about the operation in which Pat Tillman was tragically killed. So Pete, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So, as usual on this show, we'll start off at the beginning. Pete, tell us a little bit about what your upbringing was like and what led you towards military service.
Sure. So, born and raised Oak Park, Illinois, a suburb outside of Chicago. Great place to grow up. I was the middle kid of 9 kids. Still to this day, I am amazed my parents and how the heck they did it. But my mom was an amazing taskmaster. She used to have a big matrix of jobs that we had 3 days a week. I usually had to clean the bathrooms and mop the floors, swabbing the decks at an early age. And, just a normal upbringing, played baseball, football, hockey. Probably my favorite pastime, what I think should have been a sport, was bombing cars, throwing snowballs at cars. It's the beginning of my, I think, infantryman life. I realized I, loved both the thrill of the hunt and the thrill of the chase. And so, I took it pretty seriously, and probably, again, caused my parents quite a few heartaches, running home, hiding. Why are you hiding? Some guy would come flying through the yard, searching for us. In high school, I ran cross country, played hockey and ran cross country. And, the cross country was kind of an extension of that bombing cars. People would go, why are you running cross country? And I said, well, I want to get to a state where nobody can catch me, and I can run forever, and no one has any chance of catching me. And I think cross country does that. It gives you an incredible endurance. Teaches you to deal with pain in your own way. And, it was, unbeknownst to the time, one more step in the process on the way to, joining the military and becoming an infantryman. I was not, like a lot of guys you talk to on the show, I certainly was not a model of scholastic excellence. I just being in a classroom, all that stuff was not for me. My brothers and sisters were, super smart, straight A students. So, I was like the unspoken, semi-retarded brother, special ed guy. And, it was really just, I could not stand, had no academic discipline, and just did not like being in the classroom. So I graduated high school. It was time to go to college. I went to Southern Illinois University, which is at the bottom of Illinois. It's the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. And I chose Southern Illinois not for its athletic programs, certainly not for its academic programs. I chose it because it was surrounded by the 275,000 acre Shawnee National Forest. And, my first time down there, coming from a suburb of Chicago, I was, it was like Nirvana. Just this endless rolling hills, a place you could get lost in, camp out, do whatever you wanted. And it was pretty much the focus of my college career too. Every weekend I was out hiking in places like Panther's Den and Devil's Kitchen, just wilderness in every direction, exploring it, and just learning to navigate things like that. Right when I graduated high school and got into my first year of college, that was the Iran hostage rescue mission, and from that point on, that was the thing that turned me toward the military. As I mentioned, I didn't know anything about the military. There was no military around Illinois. I don't think I ever even saw a camouflage truck when I was growing up. So I really knew nothing about it. But when that happened and, the news came out about what happened, it just had an incredible effect on me that 8, American heroes died in the middle of Desert One. They gave their life to save the hostages in Iran. And so, I was a runner. I was doing triathlons in college by that point. So I would just go on long runs and think about my future and think about, what a great country I lived in, what an unbelievable upbringing I had. And, my conclusion was I need to pay something back to the country. And, in my last 2 years of college, I started going to recruiters to try to figure out what was out there. And, Jack, I heard you on one of your podcasts say you didn't know anything. And I was the same way. I just did not know a thing about the military. So someone told me to go, to the Air Force and fly jets. And I didn't want to do that, but there was an Air Force recruiter right there. And I went down, talked to him, and it didn't take long for me to come to the conclusion that I was in the wrong recruiting office. So I started going to Army recruiters, and I put plural because it took me 4 recruiters to get one that would just give me what I wanted. They were all trying to get me to sign up for things I never heard of. And, I will add that I was shocked at the time because for some reason, I thought everyone, if you're in the Army, you're an infantryman. Mm-hmm. So when they started talking about tankers and artillery and medical corps, and I was like, what? Who does that? And that's what they tried to get me into. And that's why I kept going to new recruiters. And I finally found one. I still remember his name. The name was Terry Story. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to join Delta Force. And he goes, well, you can't do that. You can't sign up for that. You could do that when you get in, but you got to have an MOS. And I said, well, like what? And he said, well, you probably should go infantry. And I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I signed up. My contract was for infantry OCS. That's what it was called back then. And, when I graduated, I hopped on a train and it took me off the basic training. You have to make it through basic in order to go to OCS. And then, you're a PFC. And if you make it through OCS, you get commissioned. If you don't, you go back to being a PFC. OCS is at Fort Benning, so I would have gone, across the post to AIT. But I didn't. I made it through OCS. It was also a great experience. Like I said, it was torturous, but I was an endurance athlete, so I could do like 1,000 push-ups at a time and never even wince. So it it was fun for me to go to OCS. And then, of course, while I was there, I started picking brains of prior service guys or guys who were going to OCS prior enlisted. There were a couple of E7s in there, and I would ask them, hey, I want to go to the Rangers so that I can get to the unit. How do I get to the Rangers? And they said, yeah, well, you can't go to the Rangers. You got to go somewhere else first. And I said, well, where? And they said, the quickest way is to go to Korea, do a year in Korea, and you can get to the regiment. And I did that. I went to 1st and 38th Infantry, Camp Hovi, Korea. Again, amazing first tour of duty. I had a great battalion commander, great company commander, Freddie Ruoff, great First Sergeant Johnson, Vietnam veteran. Did my 3 months on the DMZ. You get to patrol with live ammo and lay out live claymores. So really a cool thing, in 1986 to be able to do that. I say that because in the 80s, the prevailing wisdom was there would never be a war again.
Yeah.
You'd kind of missed everything. And a lot of us didn't really accept that, but, in the back of our heads, we were like, oh my gosh, I may never get to see combat in my time in. And so being able to patrol with live ammo and lay out live claymores was a really, really cool thing. And sure enough, I applied to go to the regiment. I got accepted, came right back from Korea to Oakland, and then drove up to Fort Lewis, Washington. I was assigned to 2nd Ranger Battalion. And back then they didn't have, RASP or RISP or whatever it's called now. You just went right to the battalion. And, I went there. I served 4 years. It was an incredibly formative period of my life. Both the battalion commanders I had were amazing. Colonel Ellis was my first one. My second one was Colonel John J. Mayer. And, he had an effect on me that would stay with me for my entire military career. He was just a fantastic battalion commander, approachable. He would talk to PFCs the same way he would talk to the regimental commander when he came down. I was a junior lieutenant, and in the regiment, junior officers usually fear their battalion commander. I had no fear of my battalion commander. He was funny. He was full of wisdom. He would correct you when you were wrong, but he was just an amazing guy. And that permeated the entire battalion. It taught me what a command climate is. Mm-hmm. Command climate is based on the sum total of choices made by the leaders in that climate system. And it's a leader's job to monitor that climate. And he did that incredibly well. He would fire bad people, get rid of them right away. And, everything he did, he had kind of a principle to. And he once told me, you can be the funniest, best guy to hang around with in the world as a commander. But if you turned a blind eye to toxic, tyrannical subordinates, your guys will despise you just as much as they despise that tyrant. Mm-hmm. And he said, one of your primary jobs is to get rid of those guys. That's what the guys are dependent on you. They're going home every night miserable going, man, I hope the boss does something about this. And again, that stuck with me my whole career. He was incredibly tactically astute. He taught me you never move with any element without leaving a stay behind ambush. And my entire military career, I was always leaving stay behind ambushes. But the real wealth of knowledge was not so much military, but life knowledge and esprit de corps knowledge. He would say the best form of welfare for the troops is to get them home in time to eat dinner with their families. And you guys both been in the Ranger Regiment, so you know it attracts a lot of these, borderline psychotic type A personalities who, they'll stay till 10:30 at night,
right.
Pushing pencils, pushing papers, and trying to stay a little later than the guy, in the next company or whatever. And so he not only said that, he enforced it. He would go around at 6 o'clock and go, why are you still here? Who's telling you to stay here? And he'd kick, guys out of their company areas. And, everyone, not just me, loved that about him. The other thing he taught me was to always talk calmly on the radio. And, he did that during a big FTX where we were searching for, the precious cargo. It was a nuclear device, and I was a platoon leader, and we found it. And I got so excited, I got on the radio and squeaked, I found the precious cargo. And, it was embarrassing, to say the least, but only retrospectively when he pointed it out to me, after the mission was over. And he said to me, look, it happens to everybody. Just remember, anytime you go to push that, your push to talk button, take a deep breath first and speak calmly. When we speak calmly, we calm the way we act, and calm, like panic, is contagious. Mm-hmm. And he's right. That's been proven by science. But in aggregate, again, it just had this amazing effect on me. Everywhere I went after that, I tried to, not mirror, but recreate that dynamic, that positive, command climate dynamic. And, along with that, be in my behavior, be like he was, which is, humble, unassuming. You're not the center. It's these guys, the guys on the ground. Your job is to take care of them. And it served me well. My company command was the 7th Infantry Division, Fort Ord, California. Again, 130 of the greatest guys I could ever have asked for in a company. My first sergeant, another Vietnam veteran, First Sergeant Carbajal, fantastic guy, taught me a lot. 2 months into my command, we invaded Panama, and we were 7th ID, so we didn't jump in, we flew in. And I ended up in the center of the city. I got the mission to protect the new presidential palace. President Indara was the president who had been in exile. He took over Panama and all of his exiled subordinates. And we just ran missions for about 4 or 5 days straight, using the intelligence from these guys who were in exile. They'd just come to us and say, hey, you need to go over here to this grid, this location. Some of Noriega's lieutenants are hiding there, and we captured a number of his subordinates. On one mission, we were going. It was a tipper that Noriega was hiding in the Communist Party headquarters, and to get to our targets, we basically jogged down the street. We didn't have Humvees, and even if we did, I probably wouldn't have used them. Imagine trying to get a bunch of light infantrymen in and out of Humvees in a city. It was much quicker to just move at a fast pace. And it was on that mission that I had a platoon plus, and then me and the first sergeant in the back, and we were about halfway there, and all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. A firefight. Every guy in the platoon was firing his weapons. We were in the back, so probably at that point strung out like an accordion, about a block and a half behind the lead guys. And, I was taught, be patient, don't get right on the radio and start yelling for a sit rep. Let the front guys figure out what they got, give them some time. So, I gave him what seemed to me like a minute. And I just said, 1-6, this is 0-6, what do you got up there? And no answer. I tried it again, no answer. So me and the first sergeant started making our way to the front, which is incredibly difficult to do in an urban environment in a firefight, because, you're not a line of troops anymore. Everybody is all over the place. There's guys under cars, guys in doorways, guys behind garbage cans, and they're all shooting. So, the potential to get shot was pretty high, but we weaved our way forward until I came to the lieutenant, and he was the front guy laying down, shooting his M16. And, I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, hey man, what's going on? What do you got? What do you got? And he goes, I'm not sure, sir. There's enemy up there. And I go, where? And he's up there. And I said, what do you mean up there? And he said, that window over there. I said, you mean where those curtains are flapping? And he goes, yeah, he's behind that curtain. I said, they don't have air conditioning here, that they keep their windows open. That's just a curtain flapping in the wind. And he goes, oh, I didn't know that. I said, why didn't you get on the radio and give me a sit rep? And he said, well, I was too busy shooting my gun. So we immediately called ceasefire to the platoon, and, didn't think much of it. I will add, the building burned down. But we went to our target, dry hole, got back. And about 4 years later, I was in the unit at the time. I was in an airport and I ran into a guy who I knew from the 7th ID, and we started talking. And you always search for common ground when you meet somebody. He was like, yeah, and I was in Panama. And I was like, wow, I was too. And he said, yeah, I was in the city. And I was like, yeah, me too. And they started talking about this massive firefight he was in. I was like, where was it? And he gave me the intersection, and that was the intersection between our two elements, the demarcation line. And from talking to him, I realized that it was his company on the other side of that building. I don't know if someone had an AD or someone saw something, but, one shot started it, and it was a, friendly firefight. Very luckily, no one was injured or killed in it, but, I totally went to school off it. It changed my mindset about firefights from that day forward, including, I was in the unit at the time. So it really changed. Every situation I looked at differently, and, asked hard questions of myself if I was in it, or, if it was a kind of lesson learned historical thing. And, I started realizing how common friendly fire was, and how easy it is in a combat environment to get into a friendly firefight.
Pete, let me just take a quick moment. We got to give a shout out to the sponsor of tonight's show, which is Vitamin One Water. I really hope you guys will take a look at them. We drink it here in the studio. It's veteran-owned business, and they make a sports drink that is similar to other sports drinks you may have heard of, except it doesn't have all of the sugar in it, but it does have the electrolytes and all the things that you do need. And you can go and find Vitamin One on Amazon right now. Best place to go and get them directly. So please go and check them out. We really appreciate it. And please also take a look at our Patreon. The link's down in the description if you want to get these episodes ad-free.
We also want to do couple quick shout outs. Posterity Ciderworks. Thank you very much. We were drinking you last show and we didn't call you out because we were too busy enjoying your cider. But it's Posterity Ciderworks. This one, it's like, I think small batch cider, right? Like it's good cider, kind of homemade in a way. It's this is in the garden, and it's actually dedicated to our friend Dave Madden, who was on the show, who recommended this brand to us. And also want to thank Brett Allen for sending us his books. Sly Fox Hollow and Kilroy is here. We have not had a chance to read these yet. They have great reviews on Amazon, so check them out if you're looking for something good to read. Thanks, Brett. I wanted to, because a lot of your books are about leadership, and and you've talked about a couple of the influences, but I want to ask you, sort of going back in your leadership journey, what is it like showing up as a butter bar, lieutenant in an infantry unit in Korea, which is at the time was the hottest thing going, right? Like you said, live ammunition, and you were you given guidance in terms of, because a lot of these guys are as old, if not older than you, in your platoon, things like that. How does a young lieutenant manage that, or were there things that you learned while you were there? It's got to be challenging, right?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dave. I think it's the rite of passage, and it's a little tougher on those new guys for a reason. You got to prove yourself. You've got to earn your credibility, and I always felt that way. I always felt, not like deficient, but I knew I didn't have experience. And, my upbringing taught me I'm wrong more than I'm right. So, in order to flip that ratio, you tap into this wealth of knowledge around you. And, I mentioned my first sergeants for a reason. When I talked about my tour as a lieutenant at 275, I did not mention that the sergeant major there was the same sergeant major for my whole 4.5 years, Sergeant Major Leon Guerrero. And he took it upon himself. His job is to train all the NCOs in the battalion and to mentor them. But he took it to another level. He also, I believe, saw that his duty was to train the lieutenants, and he did. And I think that should be in, most sergeant majors should include that in their duty description. He's the guy who taught me, don't be in a hurry to die. That's what happened on LZ X-ray. That lieutenant ran off his helicopter into the jungle. He saw a Viet Cong right on the edge of the jungle who took off running, and he ran after him, and his whole platoon ran after him. He never told them what he was running after. And when he finally stopped, they were surrounded, and LZ X-ray was really the battle to save the wayward platoon. And he taught us that, and he would say to me all the time, and I was that lieutenant. I was overly aggressive, subject to my aggressive impulsiveness. And he taught me, don't be in a hurry to die. Leaders who are impulsive lead their people to their deaths. And I never forgot that. I packed that with me through my whole career, and it saved me and my guys countless times. So, as a butter bar, it's kind of the same thing. You've got to earn your credibility, obviously, physically, tactically, but you got to listen. And, you've got the wealth of knowledge around you. So it's only a matter of tapping into it, asking the right questions, and, being patient, because you're not gonna be a combat, hardened, wise veteran in a few months or even a few years. You just got to keep building on that knowledge.
Yeah. Were there, whether it was in Korea or Ranger Battalion, you've mentioned like some good leadership examples. Were there some blatantly, whether it was on the officer side or NCO side, some blatantly bad examples that were learning experiences for you?
I think all my battalion commanders, I was very lucky. So my battalion commander in Korea was an amazing Vietnam veteran. Just I can't say anything but good things about him. Same thing when I got to the Ranger Regiment. Both my battalion commanders were great. Probably peers. I learned more from peers and as a lieutenant captains, and there were plenty of those. There were, guys who were hypocrites, guys who, were a-holes to their people, guys who were tactically incompetent. And, you learn vicariously from those guys, just like you do from the good guys. I'm never going to be that way. I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to treat people that way. And, you can really go to school off of those incompetent people, just like you can off of the incredibly competent ones. So, most of my early military career, though, I'd have to say I was just blessed with great senior leadership and senior non-commissioned officers.
And by the time, so you were in 7th ID, a company commander. When does the idea of like going to selection kind of come to your head and you start thinking about going and making the leap?
Yeah, so it was already in my head. I knew, the criteria was you had to have a successful company command as an officer to go to selection. So, I was I would have stayed in that company for as long as they'd let me stay, but the military, it's 2 years and out. And so as my 2 years were coming up, I started the process, contacting the unit, going through all the prerequisite stuff. And, 7th ID was at Fort Ord. So about a month before I finished command, the unit selection team came out to California, and I did my psych and PT test at the Presidio of San Francisco. It was still open as a military base. I ran my 2-mile part of the PT test underneath the Golden Gate Bridge with boots on. And, I was kind of a running machine at the time. So I was, going to max VO2, trying to set, my personal best record. But I can still remember running under that bridge just going, man, I love the military. It's just such an amazing place to be. And, sure enough, things worked out for me with the psych and the PT test. I went to selection right after I got finished command. I think I finished command in August or September, and then I went to the next selection, which was, I believe, October. And again, fortunate, didn't get injured, made it through that, and I was in the unit in 1991. So I was only at Ord for the shortest possible period of time. I didn't have to serve as a staff officer. It was just command, go to tryouts, and then off to the unit. And for a long time, I was the only one who in the unit from the 7th ID. 2 more guys came a few years later before they shut it down. But yeah, that was my transition. It was because I was influenced by Desert One before I even got in. I knew that was Delta on the ground. So even though I knew nothing about really what they were or how they operated, I knew from that day on that that's where I wanted to go in the military. So, it worked out.
So in 1991, you get there. I mean, tell us a little bit about like what the vibe was in the unit at the time, what the mission was like. I mean, like if you can take us a little back in time, to the mission and the culture of that era.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, and it's there are some senior NCOs who can explain it much better than me. They've explained it to me and, enlightened me on it. It was kind of a transitionary time because the military was still kind of transitioning. you had the old school guys who were there in the early days, and firing MP5s and wearing those black watch caps, things like that. And this was definitely, the step into the future. Everything was modernized, weapons, camo, nods, were taking those massive leaps in the 90s. So it was a really cool transitionary time. I went right to a troop. I was a troop commander, my first job. And again, because I've seen a number of your episodes, two of the guys in my troop, Gary Harrington and Dale Comstock, were both in there at the time. And I'm sure many more that you'd recognize, but those are the two I saw on your program. I think the unit was kind of, finding its new way at the time. And, missions were changing, but a lot were staying the same. The, aircraft hostage rescue, aircraft takedown, those type things were the same, but, new missions were coming on. The Counternarcotics was, became the biggest mission for the military. A lot of people don't know that, but Bill Clinton, signed a presidential decision directive, making that the number one priority for the military. And inevitably, showing the changes, that's what ended up driving my first big missions. I went down into Colombia with the first groups after Pablo escaped. I did 4 tours in Colombia, spent 2 Christmases there. And again, incredibly formative, learning how to deal with embassy people, learning up close how the CIA operates. I was a senior captain at the time, which is rare in the unit. Usually the junior officers are majors, but because I had that, fast pace through command, I was still a senior captain. But here I was down in Colombia, working out of an embassy. I blend in anywhere is one of the principles. So, I would wear a suit in the embassy, and then I'd go out, to visit my guys and spend time with them operationally in Medellin and Cali and all over that country. It was incredibly dangerous time to be down there. Pablo was blowing the shit out of the country. So, there were car bombs, there were mailbox bombs. We were armed all the time, even whether you're in a grocery store in Bogota or, you're down in Medellin or Cali. And so, again, just the building blocks, I think, of the future of the unit were there, forming teams based on, competencies. So, teams like a homogenous team was not sent down there. Guys were picked from different squadrons. Language was a big part of that. But disposition was a big part of it too. You guys know this, you get the full spectrum of people in any unit you go to. Some guys are just not really capable or wired to be, interacting in an embassy or interacting with foreign, generals, colonels, and, other guys are incredible at it. They're just, you watch them in awe as they deal with these people. And so I learned a lot down there. Mostly it was about, human hunting. Most of the lessons were how you find people who don't want to be found. This tireless search for clues and always tapping into anyone who has any type of information, totally open mind about it, not getting caught up in, a military approach to things. We saw ourselves down there. We would often talk about, what do cops do in America when they find, a fugitive? They don't, call in 2 SWAT teams, surround the place, and then, begin an aerial attack. They just 2 or 3 guys, figure out what they got. If it's a fleeting opportunity, they go in there and they interact with the environment. And that was the big lesson for me, and also patience. It takes time to find people. It's very difficult. You've got to have guys on the ground, and you've got to listen to those guys religiously, or you're never gonna find who you're looking for. Again, great tours. I actually left Colombia on one tour, flew to New York, and then flew to Mogadishu, Somalia, for Somalia. And then when that ended, I flew back to Colombia for another tour, going after, I believe, the Cali cartel on that one.
Did some of those like manhunting techniques that your unit was developing in Colombia kind of transfer over to the hunt for Adid and all those guys in Mogadishu?
Yeah, totally. And now, again, you had kind of your question about the unit and the transition. You had these competing schools of thought, and so my school of thought in Mogadishu was different than the Special Operations Command above us and the way they wanted that prosecuted, which was helicopter centric. Mm-hmm. And if you talk to guys who were there at the time, they know I was already anti-helicopter, and that's not anti-helicopter pilot or anti-get on a helicopter. I just don't believe. I believe it's the last resort as an assault platform. If you can get there on the ground, if you can sneak up and achieve surprise, do not default to the helicopter. And so my thing with Somalia was these helicopters are going to get blown out of the sky. We did, before anyone went over there, before C Squadron went over there, we all did rehearsals, and in our nighttime rehearsals, we timed infilling on a Black Hawk and infilling on a Little Bird. And, a Little Bird can break, flare, and hover in about 5 seconds. So if it's a roof or a balcony, you can unass those guys in about a total of 10 seconds. A Black Hawk, it takes 45 seconds for the best pilots to break, flare, and hover, get the ropes down, or land. And so it's a huge amount of time, and you're dealing with in a place where everyone has a gun. Mm-hmm. So our thinking was, we should be going to the targets hidden inside. They were called SSTs, shit-sucking trucks, because they drove throughout Somalia, and they were like garbage trucks. No one bothered them because they were sucking up all the shit. And my thought was, and a bunch of the guys, it wasn't my idea. A number of my guys came up with it. Was, let's go in low vis. Let's swing all the way around. Mogadishu is like an island. Very abruptly turns into scrub desert. So, if we need to get to the other side of the city, let's make a huge arc around and then come in through the desert on the other side. But, the helicopter mentality, the kind of Vietnam direct assault mentality was very prevalent with senior ranking people at the time. And that kind of won out. But it was, the same thing. The guys were amazing. I know you've talked to guys before. When we were in Mogadishu, we had Protec helmets on, plastic Protec helmets. So the unit's always been at the forefront of research and development. Most of the equipment and rigs that you see today were developed by guys in the unit, either sewing them up themselves or buying them off the shelves and then sewing and modifying them, which is the way the whole Army should be, in my opinion. And, that was the other thing going back and forth between the unit and the Rangers. I always thought the Rangers should go back to, the old school Rangers of the early 80s, where they still had 550 cord in their boots, and they too were allowed that leeway to wear their equipment in different ways. And I know there's probably some senior Rangers gasping with me saying that, but I really believe that. Guys should be allowed to modify their equipment so that it's ergonomic. You maximize that ergonomic efficiency. Everyone's chest is different, their arms. So, let guys explore, invent, and let them build better equipment constantly. And that's what the unit did. And that's what we did start, even in Mogadishu, that was the last of the Protec helmet. After Mogadishu, they were never worn again.
Pete, just one thing I wanted to ask you while I have you here is something I was told a ways back, but I never really got the whole story on, was about Colombia, and that before Pablo Escobar was eventually, killed by the Colombians, that we made like several attempts to like ramp up capture kill missions for him. And I was just wondering if you had any like visibility on that.
Yeah. I'm not sure what exactly. There might have been times that guys in Medellin thought that was, the best course of action. But what I remember is we were, and no one told us this, we were being micromanaged down there by Southcom, which was in Panama at the time. So, you had a 4-star general in Panama with a bunch of 2-star general underlings, staff officers. And again, there's no combat. So this is like the only show in town, and they could not keep their fingers off it. But, we still operated very freely down there. And we came to the conclusion ourselves that, unless it can't be avoided, we should stay out of any direct contact, direct action like mission. And that doesn't mean we can't take them all the way up to the breach point. Right. We can't advise them. We had shared radios with them, the Agrupación, their HRT. But we, in our own minds decided, hey, we're here to lead them, and these guys need to be the ones to get Pablo. And it makes the most sense for them. It makes the most sense for the mission and for their country. If it's us, it's going to open up Pandora's box of problems. Mm-hmm. So we were very much, set on that. And ultimately, that's what happened. Pablo, people still are not clear on that, but that was 100%, Colombian mission. The young captain who was the son of the colonel who was in charge, he was out there. He was using, U.S. provided direction finding equipment, but it was not any kind of magical technology. It was, literally driving around, hoping you pick up a frequency and hoping the voice on that frequency, the trows and the peaks on it match up to his voice profile that we had already embedded in the system. And that's what happened. And they direction found him on his phone. Then they happened to see him up in an upstairs window, called in the rest of the Colombians, and they did that 100% on their own.
And then bouncing back to Somalia, I mean, were you there when the battle took place?
We got there that night. So I was in A, and that was C. So we were, it was actually the changeover night. We were there to relieve them. They were going home that next day. So we were there, and then we took over. They were pretty much, decimated by the mission. So we took over the hostage rescue mission to find Durant and rescue him. We flew, I don't know how many missions in and out of there, all on little birds. We didn't use any Black Hawks. Again, a lot of breakthroughs in technology there, lasers. We learned just how incredibly lethal and valuable lasers were. We were flying on one mission. We had 4 little birds. I was the second little bird offset from the first, and we were flying nap of the earth. And I looked forward. It just dark, it had just turned dark, and so I had my nods on, and I saw ahead of the first helicopter this person run out of a house into the yard. And, it was a woman. She had something in her hand. And, I didn't know, I knew it wasn't a gun, but she had something in her hand. It could have been a spear or anything. And, with a helicopter at that height, you never know. And she pulled it back. It turned out it was a black frying pan, probably her most valuable possession. And she pulled this thing back to throw it. And I put my laser on it, and at the exact second I put mine on it, 3 other lasers zeroed in on it, and somebody shot, and that frying pan flew out of her hand as she tried to throw it at the lead little bird. And I'll never forget that shot. I'll never forget, seeing it. That I could still see that picture in my nods, and see those lasers converge on the frying pan. So, a lot of that technology was experimental at the time, but just took off after that. Today every M4 has a laser on it.
I don't think we ever have really talked about this aspect of Somalia, but so you get there right after the big battle, and were you guys like trying to keep the pressure, obviously looking for Mike Durant, but also keeping the pressure on the militias? Was that the mission at the time?
Yeah, it was, it was crazy because there was a lot of political pressure coming down on the whole thing. If you guys remember, we wanted to go after Aidid, but we didn't want, to kill anybody or get anybody killed. It was crazy. There was no AC-130 up, just senseless decisions made at the national level. So it was kind of a flux period. No one knew what was going to happen with the mission. And so we just did what, any military guys would do. We just, Charlie Mike, let's continue with the same thing and search for both Aidid and Durant at the same time. There were just some amazing lessons learned on interoperability there. A lot of things happened with the Rangers that created a lot of conflict with those guys. And, those were interoperability things, and a lot of them were personality driven. Again, leaders who, instead of being open and, accommodating, were rigid and narrowly focused on, what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. And I think that ended up causing a lot of the chaos that occurred during that firefight.
So do you think a lot of that was personality driven? And I'm going to throw some stuff out, which may or may not be true, but were there officers that were of a rank higher, whichever unit, that thought that should be respected? Were there Rangers that were sort of the old school, were the best light infantry, and you guys are long hairs and that should be respected? Were there any Delta personalities that were like, we're Delta, shut the fuck up and do what we say? What were some of the elements that were going on, if you know them?
Yeah, I think, the most were going on with there was a a company commander, Ranger company commander, and the Ranger battalion commander. And, the movie alludes to it a little bit, but, they were, I guess you said old school. They were old school. If we're going to do it our way, and that's it. And, the Rangers, when the firefight started, we're out there in a convoy, parked in a convoy, and just everything was set up to go wrong. The battalion commander in his vehicle is leading that convoy. That makes no sense. When who puts a battalion commander in the front vehicle, as a navigator and as a convoy commander? Nobody. And that caused a lot of the problems, certainly a lot of the casualties. They went back and forth through that kill zone, I think 3 times, because he could not figure out. He was being told where to go from a helicopter. So, all of us have been in helicopters circling. No, you can't tell a guy in a city to take a left turn or a right turn. And then, make your arc around to come around the other way. They took a bunch of wrong turns. I think that front vehicle split from the convoy, on its own, went down an alley away from the convoy. The only thing that stopped it was a Somali with an RPG at the far end of the alley popped out. So they threw it in reverse and went back. And, then there was just, I can't speak credibly about the personality at the company level. I just know that there were unit guys in that same building, and that company commander would not answer his radio when guys were calling. One Ranger bled out in there, and Scott Miller was the troop commander at the time. He was trying to call him, and he wouldn't answer his radio. I'm not being judgmental here. I'm just saying it was a huge interoperability problem.
Yeah.
And, personalities, you can't come to any other conclusion than personalities, because, in those situations, rank means nothing. Your job is to make the best decision and solve any problem using logic and common sense that comes up. And if you got to subordinate yourself to someone of lower rank or of another unit, who cares? You're doing it in the name of the mission and your men. And so it always just amazes me when I hear stuff like that. And that had a big impression on me too. I went to school off Somalia. It was the final nail for me on helicopters. It was, also a nail for, always search for that asymmetrical approach, that out-of-box approach. Do not default to what every enemy in the world expects America to do, which is to come in on our shiny helicopters and fast rope onto targets.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Jack and I saw this in the GWA, and I'm sure like everybody else did too. How like tactics evolved, like things that people used to think were the standard sort of went by the wayside. Did you see that happen with Somalia too? Were there just some like wake up calls in the community for you guys?
Yeah, I think our professors, which is all the troop sergeant majors and team leaders, they totally went to school off it on CQB. A number of things changed on CQB tactics and techniques. Certainly, probably one of the biggest lessons was, never go on a daytime mission without your nods and without expecting you're going to be going on a nighttime mission. So, a lot of little things, a lot of equipment things. I already mentioned the ProTech changed after that. And, I think in general, the mindset, because, it's very clear that that was the most intense combat since the Vietnam War. And it was kind of a wake-up call, to everybody that this is the new way. This is the, insurgent warfare. Asymmetrical sounds trite, but it's true. You're fighting against guys who they don't have doctrine, and they don't have tactics, techniques, and procedures. And while you can smoke those guys in incomprehensible numbers, they're still very effective. They're swarming you, and you've got to be ready to defeat the swarm. And, there were a number of unit teams who did that. They did not stay put, which I also went to school off of. They said, well, I'm not staying in this place. Let's go out and just move and destroy the enemy instead of letting them creep up and destroy us. And they did that. It was Paul Howe, who wrote a book about it, but he's an incredible warrior. And to me,
we've had him on the show too.
Did you? Okay,
yeah.
So I never forgot him. He gave a AAR. He wasn't in my squadron, so I didn't know him that well. But my lesson from Somalia was almost everything he said about it, and the way he prosecuted, the way he reacted, the way he adapted with his team was the way I thought everyone should have performed while they were there. And you guys know, because you know him, he's an unbelievable warrior. Incredibly competent, incredibly intelligent, and his approach to me was the takeaway: never sit against the swarm. It's like when you're being swarmed by bees, you don't just sit still. You swat them back, you move around, you haul ass away from the swarm. And he did that. He took the fight to the enemy, and he's a very modest guy, but what they did accounted for a lot of the casualties that the Somalis took there.
Mm-hmm. And so after Somalia, you said you went back to Colombia on one more trip, looking at the Cali cartel after the whole Escobar thing was settled. And sort of what was like the rest of your duration there before moving on to the next assignment?
Yeah, so just, we went right from Colombia. Bosnia popped up next. And so you guys asked earlier about, influences on GWAT. To me, the PhD in human hunting came in Bosnia. Mm-hmm. We called it the living laboratory. We were able to operationalize technology. So there were no Google Maps at the time, but, there was special mapping software that you could put on a laptop, a mini libretto laptop, and, hook it in inside your vehicle in a low-vis way. We learned how to rig low-vis satellite antennas on top of our vehicles. The blend-in thing was huge. You were always basically undercover. And, same thing, just like police, you're not going to be successful unless you're out there hunting for clues, piecing together clues, just like it's a case, going back, sharing everything you learn with your team, picking up the knowledge, the understanding of the environment collectively, not individually, and doing it while undercover in a it was dangerous, but it was a fairly forgiving environment. So we could test anything out and test any concept out, and we did, and that went all right up really till 911, that living laboratory. And so
Pete,
I've said this.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I get you to scoot like a little closer to the camera? And do you have like a light in front of you? If you can flip that around or something, because you're just like so washed out. I'm afraid we got you looking like a space alien on this on this program.
Or Bigfoot, which I guess we could talk about.
Yeah, I don't mind that. Turn that down.
That's much better. We can actually see you now.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Can you? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know what happened there. Yep. So, what were we talking about there?
About how things evolved during the Bosnia campaign and all of the TTPs and technologies that you guys evolved.
Yeah. So, that's where we learned the low vis comms, the operating in a low vis environment, and guys on a continuous mission. We were there for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. So you were rotating in and out. And it was all pretty much NCO run. Our sergeant majors were the guys who ran the safe houses. And it was very complex because you had all these low vis vehicles. You had a lot of weapons. A lot of us were, under aliases. So it took a lot of highly involved organization to keep things from, falling apart and to keep the continuity, because you had to go out of your way to pass on knowledge with each tour, each, new team that came over. We ended up settling on 90 to 120 day tours. Which we thought was, about the right number. Anything less was a little too short. Anything more, started really burning guys out. But it really, everything, that I did with AFO, or a lot of what I did with AFO in Afghanistan, was based on knowledge I learned in low-vis environment in Bosnia.
And I want to turn to your book soon here, so I'm not going to go too deep into Afghanistan. But when that, are you in Sean Naylor's book, Not a Good Day to Die?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I'm friends with Sean, so I mean, maybe I can direct people towards his book. Because not that I wouldn't love to talk to you about it here, but since we're like an hour and 10 minutes in, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to, unpack everything in your book. But before moving on, I mean, is there anything about the Bosnia campaign? Is there any particular operation that you'd like to highlight before we move on to the next thing?
I think the one of the big ops that I write about in my first book, the highlight is just how important humor is to imagination. And this kind of goes back to the climate that I talked about initially, and how important having that kind of climate is. You guys know this, every military guy who's watching this knows this. We survive off laughter. And without laughter, you're going to be stressed out. You're going to be a zombie. You're going to be frustrated. Military guys are, like a bunch of amateur comedians, always trying to get a laugh out of even some of the darkest circumstances. And so when you're trying to plan an op, one of the most famous, bits of advice that old school senior leaders always give you is they say, all right, knock off the crap. We got to get serious. It's time to plan. And it turns out that's exactly opposite of the way our brains work. Humor and insight are indelibly linked. Mm-hmm. So humor makes you think of creative ideas and insights you'd never come up with unless you were laughing. And a lot of that has to do with contrarian thinking. The brain is a natural contrarian like machine. If I say black, you think white, just naturally. So what that emphasizes is even some of the dumbest, most foolish ideas in history probably gave birth to some of the greatest and insightful ideas, especially in the military. And, I kind of knew that just from experience. That was always the way we operated. But Bosnia, we took it to another level. And so, trying to figure out how to stop a vehicle with one of the top three principles that we were going after over there, who is in the vehicle with his security detail and his daughter. How do you stop it in a non-kinetic way that will ensure that you're not going to kill that daughter while you're trying to capture this guy? And, we sat in a safe house. It was probably 2, 3 in the morning, and we just started brainstorming, and any idea was a good idea. And, that's where I talk about the idea of, a gorilla costume. Uh-huh. And the idea was get some guy out there who just, makes them go pull their face up to the front windshield and go, what in the fuck is that? And it's that moment where we had a special round. It was called a slam round. And I don't know what happened to this thing. It's a fantastic device. I believe the Austrians came up with it. It's like an RPG round. It's about that big, the round, but it has a stick on it that fits right into your M4 barrel. And you fire that thing just like you fire a normal round. And it's called a slam round. It's like a RPG concussion grenade. So when it hits something, it's like a flashbang. It creates a concussive effect that knocks people out for about 10 to 15 seconds or knocks them incoherent. And, that ended up being the concept we came up with. The mission ended up changing based on weather and a few other things, but only through laughter and hilarity did we come up with that concept. And anybody could come up. One of the great ideas came from one of the most junior guys in the group, which again shows that making good choices is about options, and the more options you have to choose from, the better your choices are going to be. And that's what we learned on that mission. It really, that too stayed with me all through Afghanistan, Iraq. If you're planning, get comfortable, be like you guys are right now, sitting down in a good chair, having something to sip on, seriously, and just, laugh, because humor and insight are indelibly linked. So next time you hear someone say, knock off the shit, it's time to get serious and start planning, raise your hand and tell them that's not how the human brain works.
I also before we move into the book, because the book is, a lot of it has to do with later on the GWAT, or with Pat, with Tillman. But I want to say that from the unit, you went back to Ranger Battalion, and you happened to be there at the same time I was. And I remember the whispers around the chow hall, because, there was Pistol Pete, the guy, who had, who was there. But also I think that your presence, because that was a time when Ranger Battalion was in the regiment, but particularly I think 2nd Battalion. And I think part of it had to do with you being there and your influence. It's like you mentioned, you got Jerry Barnhart there, which was, a resource that Rangers hadn't had access to up until that point in time. The Gracies, bringing civilian experts for these things. That when you were there was also when we were allowed to go to the tactical tailor and have woolly peat bags sewn into our rucksacks, and and have our web gear altered. But that wasn't something that Rangers were, that was something that there were people in Ranger Battalion that were actively resisting and fighting because it wasn't dress right dress.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And, I was fortunate going back there because I knew now the, platoon sergeants and first sergeants were guys who were team leaders and squad leaders when I was there the first time. And so knowing them and being able to connect to them and talk to them about, hey, what do we really need? What does the battalion need to, take that next step? So their feedback was amazing. Ted Kennedy, who's in my book, was incredible influence on me. Just one of these guys, you just cannot believe the wisdom that comes pouring out of them. So, most of those things you mentioned, Dave, were ended up being executed because of feedback I got from those NCOs. On the equipment side, since we've been talking about that, I came back and did a demo of why the Rangers need to switch to an AK-47 vest, which is, what we used to wear before it was part of the Mole system, before it was part, embedded in your body armor. We did a demonstration of trying to IMT, trying to get magazines, and just showing, this thing that the only reason the Rangers didn't have AK vests was because, they were too cool. And this is where the Rangers, the old school NCOs begin working, some of them, against the system. They just do not want to change. And, these guys would tell me that. They're like, hey, we've been telling them, for the last couple of years, we need to do CQB, we need to do target discrimination. And, it's the sergeant majors who at regiment and whatnot who come back and say, no, we're Rangers. We kill everything on the target. We don't need to learn how to, discriminate targets. We don't need to shoot and move. And that was one of the other things that we did while I was there. We set up the first maneuver live fire, shoot and move maneuver live fire range on Fort Lewis, where, you started on a fast rope that was between two trees about 100 meters apart. You had to crawl that thing in whatever technique you wanted with your weapon. You came out, you shot from 100 meters down a road at a target. You shot 10 rounds, you picked up, you sprinted forward, you climbed up on top of what used to be, they had those sheds over all the shooting positions. You climbed up on top of that. You took shots from a kneeling position on that. You climbed back down, ran over, went through a pipe. And, it was the purpose when we brought in the regimental commander and the regimental staff, they were like, yeah, well, why do we need to do this? And the reason you need to do it is because you need to teach yourself how to shoot when you're out of breath, how to find that respiratory pause. And so we've been training all those years, the entire military, laying on ranges in a prone position, which is not how you shoot. You're all amped up when you're shooting, and that's the way you should train. And so we did. And again, everything we did there was based on feedback from those senior NCOs. Same thing with Barnhart. They've been trying to get someone to come and teach them shooting techniques, advanced shooting techniques for a while. And so when I came, they said, hey, how can we do this? And I was like, we can do it. And since I was the S3, it was only like 20 grand to get Barnhart or something. And we were spending, $100,000 to rent the mouth site, at some obscure post. And so, I just used that money to spend on Jerry Barnhart and new equipment and stuff like that. And so, I think more than anything, it speaks of, the value of going back and forth between units, especially on the NCO level. Greg Birch did that at the end of his career. He was the battalion and regimental, I believe he was regimental sergeant major too. He was in Afghanistan. So he did that of his own accord. He had already accomplished everything you could accomplish at the unit, and he did it because he started, where I started, A Company 275, and he wanted to go back. He still to this day, he loves Rangers, and so do I, because we see them, as the future of the warrior class in the military. And so, they need they need sanity. Most of the time, Rangers have all the right ideas. They just can't get those ideas and operationalize them. And, sometimes you need a little bit of help to do that.
It was a fascinating time because it was being pulled like taffy, where you would have people like you come in and sort of be innovators and these other people who understood what needed to happen. And at the same time, I had a platoon sergeant who said, we don't need to be doing the CQB. We need to do patrol-based activities.
That's right.
That's what Rangers do, And it was a fascinating time for Rangers.
Yeah. Yep.
So, Pete, I would love to have you back again at some other time to talk about the rest of your career. I just don't. I know if we get into it, I'm not going to have any time left to talk about your book here, which I definitely want to get into. But if people, your first book is the Men, the Mission, and Me.
Mission, the Men, and Me. Yep.
The Mission, the Men, and Me. So people can go and check that out if they want to hear a bit more about Afghanistan, and maybe, I'm sure we can have Pete back.
You did a lot in. If I remember right, you did a lot about Bosnia in there too, right? And
yes.
Yeah.
Big Bosnia. That story that I just told is in there.
And then Naylor's book is Not a Good Day to Die. But we can have Pete back again to talk about that stuff. So let's launch into book 3, Common Sense Leadership Matters. Tell us about what was the genesis of this book? How did it come about and why did you write it?
Yeah, thanks. It's indirect, strange thing, but it started for me in Baghdad International Airport, 2003. I was actually commanding the unit. I went over to our staging area for Iraq as the ops officer. The unit commander had a brain aneurysm while jogging on the second day we were there. So I became the unit commander for Iraq. And, of course, JSOC was, waiting with bated breath as that happened. And, we ended up infilling into Iraq, a huge indirect route into Iraq after the invasion, which was, we were behind enemy lines and out in the field for, I think, 26 or 28 days, something like that. And when we came in, we went to Baghdad International Airport. So it had just been taken, by the Thunder Run. We occupied that to begin going after high-value targets in the city, specifically Saddam and his henchmen. And so I was commanding, in BIAP, and we were conducting nonstop ops. And the reason I recounted in the book, the reason I remember it so clearly is because on the 30th, 30th of May, we had what ended up being the biggest casualty producing, op that we had up to that point in either war. And nobody died, but 4 guys were injured, 2 of them seriously on a target. And it was a target that, they did everything right. They got in there, they took out the first 4 or 5 guys, and then, some crazed dude came running out with his AK on automatic and spraying everybody, and he hit 4 guys on that target. So those guys were flown back to BIAP that night, and it was, a typical unit staff. I had 3 guys with me, and so we ran out to the helicopters to take those 4 guys off the helicopters, and obviously, we couldn't get 4 stretchers off quickly. And all of a sudden, all these Rangers ran out, 12 Rangers, and started helping us. And we transloaded, we brought them we had a JMAL set up there. We brought them in to be triaged. They were going to be flown out to Germany, critical care unit, but they were triaged right there. And, before one of the guys was put under with anesthesia, he said to me, hey, Panther, we sure could have used a few extra guys on the target. Some of these Rangers for security would have been helpful. And I was like, got it, Chris. Hang in there, and I'll get working on that right away. So they put him under. I went back, immediate request to Joint Special Operations Command. Hey, we would like a minimum of a couple squads, but a platoon worth of Rangers to help us out to isolate these targets. And, that was, I sent that mission up that night. Now, those guys carrying the stretchers in, unbeknownst to me, and as they came out, I thanked each one of them. I shook their hands, said, hey, really appreciate it. And, when a unit guy like talks to a junior ranger there, they think it's, they were taken back. They were like, wow, this guy's thanking us.
Right.
And, but I was genuinely appreciative of it. And, that turned out to be, they were all from 2nd Platoon A Company, and Tillman was one of the guys who was there.
Oh, wow.
So the next night, I was, we were doing more ops. I was on the radio, and I saw a Ranger come in to our area. I was coincidentally, my TOC was set up in the Delta ticket counter area. And so I heard this voice, and I was like, I know that voice. And it was, one of the guys I mentioned. I'm not going to say his name because he's still active with another government agency. But I knew his name. He was a guy I worked with in both my tours in 275. And, I'll call him Sergeant X. And I was like, Sergeant X, what are you? I was really happy to see him, because not like personality wise, I was happy to see him because I thought it meant he was coming over as the lead NCO to be my isolation force. But that's not why he was over. He just looked at me and he said, sir, can I talk to you in private? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I grabbed my long gun and we went out and walked, along the inactive runway. And I said, what's on your mind? And he just went into this long litany about the command climate in the 2nd Battalion and how toxic it was. And, he gave me numerous examples. They're in the book. And, he was very clear. It wasn't just one individual. So, and I try to get that across in the book. This is why climate is so important to understand. It was multiple. And, I said to him, well, what can I do to help? I had been out of the Rangers. I left, Dave, while you were there, I left in 98. So this is 2003. So I've been out 5 years. And I was like, Sergeant X, what can I do? I'll do anything, but what do you need me to do? And he said, I don't know. Can you just talk to someone in our higher headquarters? Maybe get someone to come down, take a look. Anything will help. And he was very apologetic, about bothering me. I'm like, dude, you're not bothering me. Senseless leadership in a combat zone is as deadly serious as it gets. Mm-hmm. And so I told him I had to go back. We had a mission going on a target. So I had to go back, and I said to him, hey, look, you have my word. I don't know what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it, but I will find someone and I'm going to make it known. And we're going to get someone over there to check out what's going on. And, again, back to this theme, because we've talked to 275, we've talked about, our initial battalion. Like when he told me that, it wasn't just a thing, all these faces, went flying through my brain. I could see them. And I just was like, man, those guys are struggling. They're sucking. Those are good people. They don't deserve that. And again, it's deadly serious when that shit happens in a combat zone. So, and after him, 2 more NCOs grabbed me on the way to the chow hall and said the same thing. So that's 3 senior NCOs crossing command lines to tell someone about a problem. So, internally, I only thought about this later, not at the time, but it tells you how serious it is.
Right.
Because Ranger NCOs, I mean, you got to be like waterboarding them to get them to complain about anything. They don't complain. You got to coerce a Ranger NCO to tell you what's bothering him, because you learn to suck it up, and you learn that you don't complain. And so I knew, because I understood that about Ranger non-commissioned officers, I knew this had to be pretty serious for them to do what they did. And 2 nights later, I saw a senior Ranger officer, and I'm anonymizing him just because I anonymize a lot of the guys in the book, but Rangers know who he is. And I approached him, and I had a great relationship with this guy. I had been in L&O with him when I was the S3 of the Rangers 5 years earlier. I knew him then. He was in the Rangers then. He was a rank above me. And I knew him that whole time leading up to that. I never served with him or anything like that, but I knew him and had a very good relationship. And I saw him, and I said, he was the most senior guy, and he was the only guy who was at BIAP from our higher headquarters. So I said, hey, can I talk to you? And I pulled him aside, and I said, look, I want to tell you what 3 very competent NCOs told me, and I think it's pretty serious, and you can tell me what you think. And I laid out very carefully, trying to use their words, not to in any way throw in anything that wasn't said to me, anonymizing their names, because I understood the ramifications and how the regiment sometimes reacts when people complain. So I told him all the examples, and he wasn't saying a thing, and it was dark out, and he was smoking a cigar at the time. I couldn't see his face, so I just stopped and said, to let him talk. And he, took another hit off his cigar, blew the smoke out, hit me in the face, and then he stuck his finger in my chest and said, you don't know, you've been out of the regiment for 5 years, and you don't know anyone in that chain of command. So go back and tell your anonymous NCO sources to stay in their lane, to do what they're told to do. And if I had a nickel for every time a Ranger NCO complained about what he was told to do, I'd be a rich man. And he turned and walked away. And, I was not, I had no expectation of what was going to happen there. I'd never done that before in that type of situation. But I was confident, I felt like that was an emotional reaction by him. And I was confident that even the most selfish leader would, with time, consider what he had just said and consider the implications of doing nothing, and from a selfish standpoint go, hey, I probably need to look into this, because this guy could make me look bad. And so that's what I just trusted that something would happen. He would do something. Well, I went back to commanding the unit. Within a week or two, someone came up and told me, hey, 275 just redeployed. By the way, our request for augmentees was denied by a higher headquarters. So these guys were sitting around doing nothing. They ended up doing nothing. But for some reason, they weren't allowed to come and do missions with us.
Wow.
And they redeployed back to Fort Lewis. And my thinking at the time was that he must have looked into it, must have found this was going on. And that's why, because why else would you leave in the beginning phases of the Iraq War? Why would you fly back to Fort Lewis, especially when, I've got guys getting shot because we don't have enough guys to isolate targets. So that was my conclusion, and I didn't think anything of it. Any time after that, I did a tour. It was my war college year. After that, I was promotable to full colonel. I pinned on when they gave me command of the unit. So I had to do my 1 year off, and I basically was off the grid. And that next year, I didn't know, what, if anything, happened. And it was many, many years later after I got out where, Krakauer wrote that book. And I finally read that book in 2015. And as I was reading it, and I didn't read it because a friend of mine said it was too political, don't waste your time with it. But I read it in 2015, and I came across this passage where Krakauer had Pat Tillman's diaries, and he printed 3 of his passages from his diary, and they were a biap. And so I'm reading it, and it's they're in the book, but he says, last night we helped carry in 4 wounded Delta Force guys. Somehow, combat became more real. I never thought it would happen. You never know. And then his next passage was, we're flying home at 03:30 tomorrow. I'm not sure the time. Thank fucking God. And so I read this and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Pat Tillman was, I didn't even know he was in battalion at the time when they were in Iraq. Much less did I know he was one of the guys who carried the stretcher in. So, I started talking to Ranger NCOs and going back and trying to piece this back together. Hey, whatever happened, during that time? And again, one of the guys I mentioned, Ted Kennedy, was, a huge source of enlightenment for me. He told me about, them returning to Fort Lewis, what happened. And he also told me for the first time that the same chain of command that those guys came and complained about to me was in place in Afghanistan 1 year later. And that's when, I kind of realized, hey, wow, this is, what do I do with this information? He also told me that Mrs. Tillman was still investigating what happened. She was, talking to a bunch of the guys. She wanted to know anything anyone knew about it. And so I felt compelled to provide her with this information, not thinking it was some key clue or anything. I just felt compelled to tell her, about it, and to tell her that Pat carried my guys in, and, what a great guy he was in Iraq. So, that conversation led to her reading my book and then saying to me, hey, I have these investigative documents. I know you were in Afghanistan. You were a ranger. All these people. Could you take a look at it and tell me what you think? And I said, the only thing any of us could say to the mother of a fallen comrade, I said, of course. And I drove up there that next day, 400 miles, and picked up the investigative documents, met her. My first words to her were an apology for the Army, and, just to tell her that we're not, everyone I've ever talked to is embarrassed about that. And, I have no idea what happened, but I'll read these documents and I'll tell you what I think, even if it's not what you may want to hear. Because at the time she was, she'd been twisted into, just wild ideas about what happened, and not because she was delusional or something, but because she'd been lied to multiple times. She'd been told multiple stories about what happened. And so, that's human nature. Anytime, when you're punched in the nose once, you learn when you're punched in the nose twice,
right.
What is
you're
the
like,
truth?
hey, I'm done.
Right.
Yeah. And so she was, and so I started reading the documents, talking to every ranger I could talk to. That was 2017. And, Jack, I think I said this to you in a separate conversation. what was a very difficult thing. I knew when I told her I'd look at it, when I got home, 3,500 pages of documents. I spread them out in my office. And I just was like, hey, I might as well get started. And I started reading one binder. And 9 hours later, and about 100 sticky notes later, I was like just captivated by it. And I knew there was something there. I knew I needed to go talk to the Rangers who were involved. And, that began my journey talking to those guys. And collectively, both talking to her and talking to those Rangers just became one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done in my career. And, along the way, just fascinated by, the terrain, the circumstances, everything we've talked about already in this, was very obvious, was very obviously going on the ground that day. Guys making great recommendations, common sense recommendations being denied, being told, no, you can't do that, or not even being answered on the radio. And so as I accumulated that knowledge, it kind of came together with what I already knew about bad leadership and toxic leadership. And the more guys I talked to, the more it became, just completely obvious. But the real breakthroughs, were from talking to them and then just diving into the terrain, the timing, the radio logs, seeing what people really said. And, I started talking to the guys. It was a slow process at first because not many guys wanted to talk about it. It was difficult to find most of them. But with each guy I found, that guy led me to a couple more guys. And, patterns started to avail, just shocking patterns. I don't have PTSD. So to me, I don't know I can't imagine what it is. Just like depression, people used to think depression is fake. We know it's not now. And you can't imagine depression if you don't have it. And what shocked me was how many of these guys were absolutely devastated by what happened. And most of that devastation was built on guilt and frustration. And the frustration was they had no idea what happened. They never were allowed to see any of the investigative documents. They didn't know these decisions were being made behind the scene. They didn't know their platoon leader was being told, no, you can't blow up the vehicle. Keep going. Just senseless shit on top of senseless shit. And, it had an effect on me. It really, instead of detouring me, it, hardened my resolve to get to the bottom of it and help these guys out.
Pete, can you, because I think a lot of people now are very familiar with Pat Tillman being killed in fratricide, but can you lay out what the mission was, what the scenario was, and where these command decisions and the refusals of certain requests were? Can you sort of lay out what the scenario was for us?
Yeah, sure. So terrain, it starts with terrain. And, coincidentally, this area that the Rangers were driving around looking for weapons caches is what I believe. There might be another one. It might be tied, but there's probably no more dangerous, hostile place in Afghanistan, tribally. Terrain-wise, same thing. There might be another chunk of terrain somewhere equally arduous as this area, but not more arduous. So both the terrain and the enemy are as bad as you can get at any time. And how do I know that? Because I fought the Battle of Shahi Kot, known as Anaconda. And when we chased the foreign fighters, me and my recce guys followed the Trail of Tears on the 13th day as the last remnants of the Al-Qaeda fighters fled. They fled west. And it turned out, I figured this out about a month in, looking at the map, where Pat Tillman was killed was 8 kilometers west of Takur Ghar,
Wow.
which is, the mountain where all those guys died in the Medals of Honor and everything. So we chased them right to the border, right through this area. And as we were in that area, we knew from intelligence, but we knew firsthand from being in it, how hostile that area was. I had a safe house in Oregon as the AFO commander, and I also had one in Kaust. So to get from Oregon to Kaust, the straight line is to go right through this area. We would not go through it. And when we had to, which was twice, I drove through it twice, we only had one rule: never go through in a convoy. Go through in low-vis vehicles, buy as much time as you can, get through quickly, but do not look like an enemy convoy, because these are the hardest core Pashtuns that there are. And it's a smuggling haven between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So it's not just those tribes. There's other people passing through there all the time. And so I knew how dangerous and daunting it was. And so when I read their mission, I still remember the moment. It was actually in this office. All the papers were on the floor. I dropped the binder that it was in and just, shook my head in disgust that they were just randomly driving around to find weapons caches and hoping that Osama bin Laden might be out back feeding one of the goats or something. It was the exact opposite thing we should have been doing. And it's not even so much the Rangers' fault as it is the overall Afghanistan, strategy. Just the fact they were allowed to go in there to do that for no specific intelligence is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And so these guys, the platoon and 2nd Battalion, flew into Bagram, and within 3 days, they were in their vehicles out driving around in the field without coming back into their base, what ended up being 8 days. So these are brand new guys, most of them. A few of them had a prior tour. They were there for a couple weeks in November of 2003. But other than that, no real on-the-ground knowledge. And not just that, the baseline ground elevation of this area is 6,000 feet. So, lesson learned from Battle of Shahi Kot is you don't go into any area above 3,000 feet unless you're properly acclimated. Unknown lesson from that battle is most of those follow-on forces that came in were also flown out with altitude sickness. And that's a lot of these foreign forces, the other units, conventional units. And we were telling people that. We were saying, look, you need to come to Gardez first and acclimate. It's right at, I think, 4,800 feet. And acclimate and then go in. But, we were blowing that off. So I would have stopped them just for lack of acclimation. But to go into that area and not understand how dangerous it was already a formula for disaster. And when you read the interview notes, you read the S3, the commander, these guys talking, they talk about this firefight they got in. They say, well, it was just a happenstance. We had been in that area for 8 days and all dry holes, no enemy contact. And I'd feel comfortable sending guys back, 5 Humvees back in there today. Well, again, I dropped my binder when I read that, because in Afghanistan, if you're if you've read the history of Afghanistan, you understand that 8 days of no contact means
They've
They've
feeling
been
you
studying you for 8 days.
Right.
And you are 8 times more likely to be ambushed, because that's the only tactic they were using at the time. That's their tactic of choice, the far ambush. You can go look online at the videos of how they did it to the Soviets.
Right.
They are sizing you up, and you can bet they were sizing those Rangers up. So, on the day this mission happened, they had an inoperable Humvee, and they were at a border control point called Border Control Point 5 right on the Pakistani-Afghan border. And the platoon leader called it in and said, hey, this thing's deadlined. It won't start. Recommend we leave it here, or you come pick it up in a helicopter and take it back to Kaust. Denied. Drag it with you. Oh, you guys you're behind schedule. The sync matrix, your platoon on the sync matrix is all red, and we need to get back green. Common sense and the response is senselessness. So these guys hooked up a deadlined Humvee to another Humvee using nylon straps, and took off from that Border Control Point 5 with a helipad, which, by the way, a helicopter flew in the last spare part, flew in the company commander and the XO to tell the platoon leader, hey, you need to get back on schedule. The old man's really getting pissed. So off they go. And, guys, you can watch the video online. I've posted it online. It was the fourth investigation videoed the entire canyon. When you see this canyon, they literally were dragging a Humvee through the equivalent of the Grand Canyon, like trying to get through the Grand Canyon with a Humvee. And by this time, it had no front wheels. It couldn't be steered, so it was elevated. It was just 2 wheels rolling. And anyone who's done off-road work knows, trying to get a Jenga truck with a Humvee on 2 wheels through that stuff is an exercise in futility. So their request to blow the vehicle, I should say they dragged it for 4.5 hours that morning. Their average speed was 1.5 miles an hour. So, that's important, not just for understanding the futility of it, but think of the stress levels in those guys. Sure. You're in enemy territory going 1.5 miles an hour in the middle of mountains.
Yeah. And to paint it for people, because those BCPs were generally on elevated locations. So when you say like the Grand Canyons, like they're towing something down switchbacks, hand-carved roads.
Yes.
Like that hand-carved roads that are one vehicle wide, that when you're in the driver's seat or the passenger seat.
One Toyota Tacoma wide, not one Humvee wide.
Right, exactly.
Yes,
you can look over the edge and see like the precipice. Like it's right there. Was the no to blow it in place and no to helivac it out, was that coming from the battle space owner? Was that coming from their direct chain of command? Where was that coming from?
Yeah. So again, important lesson here, which, was illuminated to me once again by these senior NCOs whose comment was, if you want to know what went wrong in Afghanistan, start with the way we tried to command and control it. And in this case here, they had just switched. Remember, this is only 2004. So we're only really 2 years into it. Mm-hmm. And we've already pretty much lost our way, because I was, with the first guys in the winter of 2001, 2002. This is the spring of 2004. And here's how the command and control was set up at the time. It was called the CFT concept, the cross-functional team concept. And the cross-functional team stipulated every staff was exactly the same around Afghanistan. And there were no more company talks, battalion talks. There were just these CFTs where you brought all your staff officers, everybody was in one place. They lived off their VTCs. That drove their schedule every day. So this platoon, who on this day as they leave Border Control Point 5, is the only platoon, or so we thought, out in the field at the time. The only rifle platoon. The other 8 rifle platoons are back in planning the next dry hole. Their chain, the way they report, is back to the first CFT, which is at Salerno and Kaust. And it looks like all of them. There's 10, everyone has a U table. There's 10 staff officers on each side. 10 of them are supposed to be working on current ops and 10 on future ops. Don't ask me how that ever was explained to anyone. I don't know. Every op is future, in my opinion. So 10 and 10, and then the CFT commander. Behind him is the lower level command. So the CFT is a battalion commander or battalion S3. In this case, it was the S3. And behind him is the company commander and company XO. So when the platoon leader, he drove, I told you, the 4.5 hours out of BCP 5, they pull into this town called Magara. It's a Pashtun town, something out of the history books 100 years back. They've barely ever seen a Westerner, and suddenly this convoy of 10 vehicles with Rangers in space age combat gear get out with a busted up vehicle. And that's where he's calling back for help. And his first call is, hey, we got a deadline vehicle. It cannot go any further. Recommend we either blow it or you bring in a 47 to lift it out. They said, Roger, got it. They reply an hour later. Okay, so, this is another binder dropping moment for me as I'm reading it. 1 hour later, they reply, permission to blow the vehicle denied. And we don't have any helicopters. Well, in the interviews, remember, I'm reading present and, future. I'm reading the interviews of what the chain of command said about their decisions to investigators. In that interview, the battalion commander said, hey, we don't blow vehicles. It's against Army policy. It just provides propaganda to the enemy. And so, that's why we denied it. Well, that's, preposterous.
Right.
I had just blown up an M1A2 tank, $4.5 million tank in Iraq 1 year earlier because it flipped over, and it would take about a week to get that thing out of the hole it was in.
Right.
So I knew right away that was BS. And the helicopter, no investigator could ever find a record of a request for a helicopter. They just told them, no, keep dragging it. It's very clear they were mad at this platoon because it had fallen behind schedule. And you guys know, the sync matrix. And this is where I go back to, these are lessons we have to internalize for the future. This modern command and control model is not modern. It's antiquated. And in my opinion, this is an example of the first time in modern military history where we've gone backwards. And we've gone backwards because of technology. In Vietnam, if those guys were out there driving around with those Humvees, their company commander, his FO, his 2 RTOs, and a small security team would have been on the highest centrally located hill camping out until they came back in with a PRC 77 radio. But he would have been on that radio all the time, and anything they needed, he'd be giving them guidance or relaying it to higher to help them out. And in this case, this CFT concept worked exactly against that, because as it turns out, many of these lags in responses are in part due to the fact they've got these VTCs going on with the commanding general. So they're sitting in this TOC, Tactical Operations Center, just enthralled with the VTC, hanging on every word of the general, why
Right.
these guys are struggling with a real world combat problem in the field, and they're either not answering them or going, just tell them to keep dragging it,
Right.
man. You know, I
Right.
mean, what are they, pussies?
Right.
And so these guys are told, no, you can't blow it. We can't lift it. We can get a wrecker out there, but the wrecker's not allowed to go off the KG highway. Again, someone made a SOP for the wrecker, which is a tow truck, that it could not leave the Costa Gardez highway, which was 15 kilometers from these guys. So what they come back and tell them after 4.5 hours in Magara, being swarmed by civilians, it's hot. There's biting flies. They're out of water. They're low on food. And again, for both you two and anyone watching this, you know, you can just imagine they're also probably red hot, pissed off at this chain of command for the senselessness. They're told, not only do you got to keep towing that vehicle, we want you to split the platoon because we need half the platoon to get to this other town called Mana as quickly as possible. No reason, no enemy. You know, it wasn't like they just saw UBL there or one of his underlings. It was because the sync matrix was still red for Mana. So they told him, rush off, get the Mana, and, you know, that's it. We don't want to hear anything else out of you. And the lieutenant, you know, in my opinion, did a fantastic job. He gave 3 reasons why that didn't make sense. And one of the things I recommend in my book is we go to a new concept called logic of why, that you don't just give an order. You always have to explain the logic of why it makes sense. And that's how our brains work. You can't persuade anyone unless they understand the logic of why. And that's usually threefold. Firstly, secondly, thirdly. And the lieutenant, this is why it's a case study. He did exactly that. He said, here's why it doesn't make sense. First of all, we'll be splitting up the platoon, and we don't have enough. We only have one SATCOM radio, so we're not going to be able to talk to each other. And if something happens, one of us going to be left out there without any comms. Second of all, we can get to the target. Second of all, we can't even clear Mana until tomorrow morning, as per battalion SOP. So why are we in a rush to get there before the sun goes down, just so we can sit outside the town to clear it the next day? And thirdly, it's much faster if we all move together, go drop the vehicle off at the KG highway, then turn around and come back and clear the town. And the answer was no. No logic of why, just no. Do what you were told to do and continue mission. And so they did. They split the platoon up. It's a random split. They wanted certain guys back in the rear for planning. They wanted the mortars, the snipers, and a couple other specialty guys back. Well, the problem with that is when you're doing motorized ops, every vehicle is set up in a certain way with certain guys doing certain tasks. You know, there's gunners, there's guys who sit in the seats next to the gunners, and over time they come up with their SOPs of how to operate. They're also organic. You know, squads are together. There's half a squad in one vehicle, half in another. So when they split the platoon, and they had to split it based on random criteria, they just disintegrated the organic nature of these teams. So now you had team leaders working for squad leaders they'd never worked for before. You had soldiers like Pat Tillman working for different team leaders and squad leaders. You had guys attached to different groups. And look, we trained to do that. That's not a kiss of death, but it's a very subtle yet important degradation of that unit's ability to deal with chaos and complexity. And in a situation where there's no time to even rehearse, to sit there and go, okay, squad leaders, you're going to do this. If this happens, you do that. They didn't even have time for that. They just took off because they had to get to Mana before sundown. And that takes us into the canyon at that point.
What I don't understand, from a leadership position is how can you have an element out there if you've only got one SATCOM radio for this element? How can you have, whether it's your lead element or the element, the stay behind, how can you have an element out there that you have no idea in the world what their what their sit rep is?
Dave, same thing. That's why I said it's another binder dropping moment.
Like what leader is okay with that?
Important,
yeah.
And that's why that's why the book is important, because it's a tactical book, and we've got to, not just in this incident but others like it, we've got to memorialize those lessons. This is basic stuff, transplanted into modern warfare, but it tells you that these principles are unassailable. You cannot divide your force randomly and arbitrarily. You can't send someone out to a place that doesn't make any sense just because you want to change a color on a sync matrix.
Right.
You can't ignore your men in the field. In the unit, when I got to the unit, one of the sergeant majors gave me a briefing on it, and he said, hey, look, right now we're not at war, but we send out a lot of singleton missions. When one guy is deployed, everybody back here in the rear is in support of that guy. So you might get a call at 03 in the morning to come in, and it might be something incredibly, minimalistic. Like this guy might need special laces for his boots that are in one of his kit bags in his locker, and we need to get them on a FedEx plane as quick as possible. When that happens, that's your mission, and
right.
You take it as serious as possible. And because I served in Colombia, I understood that. I understood both ends of it, between my tours and while I was out there. And the unit always lived by that. Everybody in the rear is there to support the guys in the field. So this is one rifle platoon is in the field. These CFTs, which I'm sorry, we got distracted. The command and control arrangement's important to understand. You've got this CFT 1010 command in Salerno, which is Kaust. They can't do anything unless the main CFT in Bagram, which is set up the exact same way but on steroids because it's regimental headquarters, they can't do anything without its permission. And it doesn't stop there. They're connected with the CFT in Balad, Iraq, which is our Joint Special Operations headquarters, and they can't do anything without the CFT in Balad telling them it's okay. So, it's untraceable, but it's not, it's not speculation to say that each of these requests were not just going to Kaust. They were going back to Bagram, back to Balad, back down to Bagram, back down to Kaust, back out to these guys in the field.
Yeah.
And no, and it's and this is where it becomes to me such a historic lesson. And Jack, I saw a podcast you did where you talked about when you joined, motivated by 911, and I think you said on it, people forget after 911, it was like World War III. Everyone was like, hey, we're at war. We're at war with the world. This is it. Well, it was also like World War II, right? It was like Pearl Harbor. And it was also like Vietnam, Gulf of Tonkin. When the shit hits the fan in America, we're a freedom-loving country, and most of us grow up like you did, Dave, like you did, like I did. We have our hardships, but we have an unbelievable upbringing, and we appreciate the freedom we're given. So when the time calls for someone to come protect those freedoms, patriots rise up and they say, send me. And, I didn't fully appreciate it till I did this research, how 2001 did the same thing. And many of the members in this platoon were those guys, were those patriots, including Pat Tillman. And, we're all young at that age. Okay. So I've heard people say, you were a fool if you volunteered for Vietnam. And whenever I read that, I was like, man, I would have volunteered for Vietnam in a second, all the way through. And not because, of some policy principle, but because we want to protect freedom. And so you cannot understand the logic of why war happens or why our country goes to war. We trust that our civilian and military leaders are thinking those thoughts and are telling us the truth, that we're going to war for a good reason and that this makes sense. So it's a contract. And those guys like Pat, those guys like Jack, that's our national treasure. These are the finest humans in our country. There's only certain guys who will raise their hand to protect freedom, especially the freedoms of those who won't stand up and protect it themselves. So it's a small cohort. And when they do that, they don't really know what they're getting into. And that's just reality. It's not, it's not like a reflective of any of our intelligence. We have no idea whether you're 18, 19, or 25 when you're joining. And let's face it, when you're 45 in the military, you still don't fully understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Right.
But at that age, you have no idea and you're trusting. So that's a contract with the leaders, the military and civilian leaders, that from here on out, you're going to make good decisions and to the best of your ability, solve complex problems that enable those individuals, those national treasure, to accomplish their purpose. And that was not the case here in Afghanistan and not the case here. And so when you hear about Pat Tillman and, you can go on and look at his videos and they your eyes will water as you listen to this great American after 9/11 saying, hey, my grandfather served, my uncle served, my family has served throughout history. I love this country. I love the freedom it's given me. My job is just, it doesn't matter. And he was a pro football player and he joined. He left that behind and he joined up. And same thing, he's a metaphor for all the rest of us. That contract was in place there, but in order to make that contract legitimate, we've got to start holding these decision makers' feet to the fire with accountability. And they have a job to do. And like I said, it's to make good decisions and solve complex problems in a way that takes care of the people that have volunteered. And that did not happen in this case.
Pete, you mentioned, I'm sorry, Jack. Pete, you mentioned before the show that, people will raise issues saying that the only reason people care about this issue is because Tillman was a professional football player. He was a national figure. He was known. That's the only reason people care. And like you said, it's like, yeah, maybe like that's a good thing, though, in the sense of there's a personality that's showing the issues, because if it weren't somebody who were known, these things happen. These things happen, on a more regular basis than we would like, and that people know. And the fact that there's a celebrity that is sort of like leading the way.
I was about to say, Dave, like maybe the reason why it's so well known is because the government lied about it. But
right.
Then you're absolutely right that the government unfortunately lies about a lot of things. And maybe the reason why this story came to prominence was because the government lied about someone who had a level of notoriety and fame.
Right.
Yeah. No, guys, that's it. And he's a great American. He was already a great American before he joined, but what he did when he joined. That's why I used the comparison to World War II, where you had, professional baseball players joining up, flying bombers and stuff. That's a sacrifice. He made a sacrifice. And, you can go back and look on YouTube. He never gave another interview after that interview he gave before he signed up. Even while he was in the Rangers, they were constantly pestering him. The battalion commander would call him in, and in fact, right before they deployed to Afghanistan, he called him in and said, "Hey, look, got a great opportunity. We'd really like you to be in the Army calendar." And, Tillman turned that down. And don't ask me what the Army calendar is. I have no idea. I can't even imagine what it is today. Yeah. But he didn't give an interview. He never wanted any attention.
Right.
And when you talk to the guys, you see he's like, he's one of the guys. He's a guy everybody liked to talk to. Even the NCOs, the staff sergeants, squad leaders will tell you, he was just one of those guys. He was a great conversationalist. He was not a problem in any way. As I mentioned with myself, and I'm sure you guys were the same way, he was a warrior. He was aggressive by nature. He wanted to take the fight to the enemy. But this guy made an incredible sacrifice, and he didn't want any credit, very humble. And so, again, it's not so important that he was a pro football player or anything about his background. He's a metaphor for all of these guys who joined to stand up for freedom. And if it weren't for him, if he was just Joe Schmedlap, we wouldn't have learned the lessons we learned from this, and we wouldn't have learned that toxicity destroys, toxic leadership, and we've got to stop sticking our heads in the sand around toxic leadership. How many of us, and how many conversations have you had where guys go, "Yeah, at that time my battalion commander was a fucking asshole beyond belief." Well, that guy should have been fired. Someone should have done something about that guy. Same thing, sergeant majors, it doesn't matter what level, platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If you're toxic, you need to be out of here, because toxic leadership destroys. And that's what happened here. The just bad decision on top of bad decision, which just led these guys into chaos, into a situation where they, by the time it happened, there was really no hope for getting out of it.
So can you, to the best of your ability, can you walk us through the events of that day?
Yeah, so they took off, at 1800 exactly. So they split the platoon, as I said, into what they called two serials, Serial 1, Serial 2. Serial 1 took off first. That Pat Tillman was with them. The platoon leader was there, and they had to get to Mana. So, I have maps in the book, and when you come out of Magra, it comes to a Y intersection. You got to go left to go to Mana, and they took the left, and about a kilometer and a half after the Y intersection, you come to the mouth of a canyon, and it's one of the most dramatic terrain features you can imagine. You can watch it live on my YouTube channel. Just go to PeteBlaber.com or go to firefight.PeteBlaber.com, and you can watch a drive-through during the investigation of the entire canyon, and you just will not believe this terrain. You will not believe how difficult it is to drive any vehicle through it, much less a Jenga truck with a Humvee. So they take off, they pass through that canyon. It's uneventful, nothing happens. They come out the other end of the canyon, Horseshoe Canyon, and they're at another creek intersection. If they go left, they're going down to Mana. They go right, they're going back up toward the KG highway. They were a little bit disoriented, which is totally understandable. They did what all infantrymen do. They did a map check. While they were sitting there in their vehicles with their map check, the second platoon had taken off about 7 to 10 minutes after them. So they flew through the canyon, Serial 1, but Serial 2, remember, is got a Jenga truck dragging a Humvee, and they're in the lead in this serial. And now I don't even think they were going 1.5 miles an hour. I think it's less than that, because to get through this creek bed, you literally have to make right angle turns back and forth. And just imagine a Jenga truck, to viewers who've never seen one, is the same as a dump truck, same size as the dump truck or the garbage truck that picks your garbage up each day. That's how big it is. And the weight's about the same. It's pulling a Humvee on its back wheels, so there's no maneuverability there. Mm-hmm. And so they're struggling to get through, but they were barely into the canyon, Serial 2, when 2 explosions happened off to their right, which is cardinal direction north, on the slope. There's, no one knows what those were. They could have been RPGs. They could have been mortars. If you read everyone's account, some guys say one, some say the other. It doesn't matter. 2 explosions. One of them dislodged a rock, about the size of a Humvee, came flying down. And so you can imagine watching this rock make its way down the side of this canyon wall. And, they used common sense and zeroed in on it, and it ended up going right between 2 vehicles. And about 30 seconds later, RPK fire opened up from the ridgeline. And, there's numerous accounts. Guys saw guys moving up there. 5 guys in Serial 2 and 7 in Serial 1 said they saw the guys running around. So Serial 2's in the canyon. They're lined up behind this Jenga truck towing a Humvee, and they return fire. Deploy, suppress, report. That's what you do in an ambush. But remember, your first immediate action in an ambush is to drive out of the ambush or run out of the ambush if you can. They couldn't do that. So, all of that accumulated stress from BCP-5 through Mogara is already, flooding their brains. Now, the worst, the most traumatic stress-inducing event that can happen to the human brain is occurring, and that's claustrophobia. They can't go left, they can't go right, they can't turn around, and they can't go forward. They can't even see forward, and they can barely see the tops of the canyon. Only around certain bends can they even see the trees that outline the crest of this canyon. So they do what they should do, which is, suppress the target to get them to stop shooting. Most of the guys just thought, we're walking dead men. We're trapped. And literally, when you watch the video, you can see that the enemy could have killed them with rocks instead of bullets. They could have just started avalanches and dislodged large boulders to do the same thing that bullets would have done. But they, Rangers being, expert machine gunners, they opened up with everything they had. Now, it's important, the terrain is, just like every military engagement, always comes back to terrain. So when I did my research on this, I spent over 100 hours on Google Earth. And I don't want to make that sound like it was some really hard thing that I had to suck up. I was addicted to it. And if you go on Google Earth and look at this slot canyon, you'll get addicted to it too, because it's absolutely amazing. But what you see in the slot canyon is it's shaped like a mushroom. So it goes up, over, comes back, and down. So exactly like a mushroom, up, out, and over. And so they're driving, and these are, remember, non-gyro stabilized weapon systems. They're just on a stiff
a pintle.
anchoring, right?
Yeah.
So the vehicle is in the toughest off-road terrain on the planet, which means it's bouncing up and down. The driver is, scared shitless. He's doing what he should do, which is drive, but he's got to navigate left, right, like, literally like a Formula One driver to get around these rocks and boulders trapped behind this Jenga truck. So the guys in Serial 2, it's when you understand what they went through before they came out, you begin to understand what happened when they came out. And you also understand what was happening to their fires. The brain can't keep track of directions unless it has a known point to base it off of. So our neocortex, our thinking brain, has these things called grid cells that tell you where you're at based on a known location. So think North Star, snow-capped peak off in the distance. It has to have that, but they're in a canyon, so they have no known point. They really can't tell anything unless they're looking at their wrist compass, which you can't do because you're being shot at. Mm-hmm. So as they go around this mushroom, their bullets are, going in directions where, they can't really predict where they're ending up. Now, let's leave those guys in the canyon and go to Serial 1. Remember, they were doing a map check when they heard those mortar or RPG rounds. As soon as they heard them, they hopped out of their vehicles and they were like, what the hell is that? They didn't know, but they could see the tracer fire arcing up out of the canyon. They knew it was coming from the canyon. Some of the guys, just suspected it was Serial 2, but most of them had no idea Serial 2 had turned around and was coming back in the same direction as them. So nobody knew that the other half of the platoon was the one in that firefight. Some guys suspected it, but no one knew it. So in the heat of the moment, they said, hey, let's go up to a position where we can get overwatch, where we can see what's happening and conduct overwatching fire in case it is Serial 2 to support them. So they ran up this path that was right next to their vehicles, a smoker run. It was about 700 feet, and they ran until the path petered out, and then they had to stop because they were taking fire. They could see the enemy on the same northern ridge line that Serial 2 was shooting at. So they started shooting too. But as they did that, they began taking unbelievably heavy fire, which, the first investigation suspected was Serial 2. And in my analysis, I believe the majority of those fires that were raining down on them were the crossfires from Serial 2. Remember, 50 cal, 240G, and SAW, along with mortars, right. AT4s. So all this ordnance is, flying up and over these ridge lines. We can't discern which is enemy, which is friendly, but they were definitely underneath the crossfire from Serial 2. So these guys were in the canyon for about 12 minutes. I told you it was less than 1.5 miles an hour. They're literally moving that slowly. The stress is building up. Serial 1 now is up on this spur, this elevated high ground. Unfortunately, the way the terrain is, you cannot see into the canyon from the top of this spur. And unfortunately, if you do a line of sight analysis, their line of sight radios also did not work. So they still had no comms. Their two purposes for running up there to make comms with Serial 2 and to provide overwatch fire support were now, nixed by the terrain. But they didn't have a lot of time. There wasn't, they were smoked. Remember I talked about equipment. They ran up there with flak vests and helmets. I believe, that was the SOP, that anytime you left the vehicle, you had to have that on. I would never, a lesson should be, if you're running up into mountains after an insurgent enemy, you do not wear a flak vest or a helmet unless you want to. I think it should be personal choice, but you can't run up a mountain at 6,000 and 6,500 feet with a flak vest and helmet. So they were smoked when they got to the top of that ridge. Remember now, they'd split the platoon. So Pat Tillman, he's a team leader. He's got one guy that's with him from his team and an Afghan who decided to follow them up to the spur. And that's who he's in charge of. The squad is not his squad. He hasn't worked with them before. Squad leader's amazingly competent guy, as good as they come. And Pat got up there. He assessed the situation. The squad was already arrayed by its 2 fire teams as per their SOP. That left Pat's team. What am I going to do? Pat said, hey, I'm going to go down this south side. There's a couple of big rocks over there. We're going to get behind those and see what we can see. And the squad leader, yeah, sure, sounds good. He looked up. It looked like a good position. And Pat, a young private named O'Neill, and one Afghan ran down there, and they took position behind a boulder, 2 boulders. As soon as they got there, they started taking fire from the south, and Pat directed fire south. So this is now the opposite direction, other side of the canyon, than everyone else is firing on the north side. And they're firing at it, to no avail. Pat turns around, he said, hey, I got an idea, went back up to the squad leader, said, hey, you mind if I we drop our gear, we run down to the canyon and go up the other side to see if we can engage that enemy. Now, he never would have gotten up the other side, but as I point out in the book, his idea to drop his helmet and his flak vest and to go down to the canyon road, which is a creek, was actually a good idea. And, especially in retrospect, because the spot they were in was the most dangerous and deadly spot, that could have been chosen. So the squad leader told him, no, those guys don't know where you're at. Stay put. And he did. So they're in position. They're down the spur about 25 meters from this squad. The squad had stopped behind the military crest of the spur. Pat went over the military crest down to these 2 boulders. No way, for him to know what was about to happen, or the squad leader. So it's only a lesson, a retrospective lesson for infantrymen in the future. In uncertainty, never give up that military crest. Always, stay behind it, stay protected, because you got options. And the problem with going down off the military crest is you have no options. And so they were down, Pat, Private O'Neill, and the Afghan. Now, the Afghan had just joined them that morning. No one knew him. No one knew anything about him. He obviously didn't speak English, but you don't need to speak English in a firefight. There were thousands of rounds at this point, including mortar rounds, arcing over their heads. You could hear the sonic crack, which we all know when you hear the sonic crack, that means the bullet's under 50 meters above you. That's the noise it makes as it breaks the sound barrier. So these rounds are arcing over their heads. Mortar and 203 rounds are blowing up. And this Afghan is 10 feet in front of the boulders, standing there with his AK-47, just unloading with his magazines. And Pat and O'Neill tried to get them to come back, to no avail. They tried waving, which again is universal. They tried using their weapons, to get him back, but he would not come back. He stood out 10 feet directly in front of those 2 boulders, standing up, firing his AK across the road. Well, now we go back to Serial 2 in the canyon. They've been in there 10 minutes, changing out barrels. Some guys have fired their basic load. They're coming out now, going west. So they've gone in every cardinal direction inside the canyon. So they're uncertain of which way they're pointing. And remember, they have no idea where serial 1 is, and serial 1 has no idea that's even serial 2. So when they come out of the canyon, it suddenly opens up and the creek turns around a small spur that is, a finger off of this larger spur they're on. And that's the first time they turn and look in the same direction they've been shooting at, the same main direction, which is north. They look north again, and there's this bearded Afghan, AK-47, firing on auto right over their head. And as the first investigator says, he might even have been fired at them, mistaking them as, Taliban. So the squad leader, comes around that corner, and he's in that front passenger seat. In my opinion, and in a lot of the other squad leaders said the same thing. He did what almost anyone would do who's been shooting at an enemy on the northern high ground for 10 to 12 minutes and sees an Afghan on the northern high ground shooting an AK-47. He looked through his ACOG sight and dropped that guy. Unfortunately, his crew were all guys who hadn't worked with him, so they have no preset verbal and hand and arm signals. All infantrymen know this. You shoot where your team leader or squad leader shoots. When in doubt, shoot where your team leader or squad leader shoots. So all of the crew serve weapons in the back turn to where the squad leader's shooting, which is at the Afghan, who is 10 feet directly in front of Pat Tillman and the Ranger private, and they open up. And in that fuselage, which happened, I don't even think it was a full minute that they were shooting in that fuselage. Right at the end, Pat was hit and killed. And so in the investigative documents, there's all this conjecture about, Pat and the private. They were yelling, they were waving their hands. Well, every guy in Serial 2 was deaf at this point. So, in the book, I point out that they had no ear protection on. They didn't have peltors on, which would have saved them. But the human ear can only take sound waves that are over 127 decibels for 30 seconds. Anything beyond 30 seconds at 127 decibels leads to temporary deafness. And that temporary deafness can last, depending on the length and how far over 127 decibels you go, can last from a minute to an hour to a day to a week. And so remember, they're shooting everything they had for 12 minutes and with no ear protection. So they're all deaf, and it's right in all of their comments to investigators. Squad leaders saying, well, and then I turned to Jones, but Jones was deaf, so I had to shake him. And every guy says the same thing. My hearing didn't come back for 5 hours. Some guys' ears were bleeding when they came out, so they're deaf. That's number one. So these guys on the spur, when you look down at the creek bed they came out of, it's clear as day, because the creek bed is, all one monochromatic color. It's all tan. So the Humvee, you can see that Humvee clear as day. When you look from the creek bed back at the spur, it's the exact opposite. The spur is this mottled rock formation of, both sandstone and lava. It's got black rock. It's all cracked up, so it's got shadows in between the cracks, and it's full of foliage. Rare in Afghanistan, but it's covered with foliage, green foliage. And so when I got to this part, I was, up till I researched that part of it, I was pretty much, it sounds like then they made a mistake. They didn't do proper target discrimination. But what you learn when you see the video and you see the pictures that CID took, these high resolution pictures, you cannot see anybody on that spur. They're invisible, totally camouflage, even at 100, even at 75 meters, even at 35 meters. And then you add in the human eye. When the human eye is moving, rattled up and down, left and right, it can't lock on to a specific target. So they're bouncing in a creek bed, firing their weapons, looking up at something that's completely camouflaged, and all they can make out is its last light. So that's the final thing. It's minutes before you had to flip your nods down, and all they can see is this bearded Afghan firing his AK, and they just did what they had been doing for 12 minutes and fired. And it's not, it's not saying they did the right thing or anything like that. It's not making excuses. It's just reality. And you have to apply reality in combat, especially if you're going to be judgmental about it. And, the chain of command seized on that. It was a fait accompli. It was an open and shut case from the beginning. These guys fucked up. They should have known. They should have target discriminated. They should have seen them. How can you not see and hear someone yelling from 100 meters away without doing any of the research, without applying practical common sense to a firefight? They convicted these guys and set off, a series of lies, because I believe the chain of command saw it as, hey, this is the easy out. It's not our decisions. It's not us telling them to drag it, to split the platoon, to go to Mana for no reason, in the middle of the night.
Right.
It's in the middle of the dusk. It's them for not properly target discriminating.
I told this to Stephen Elliott, who he wrote that book War Story. He was on this mission, and they fried the lowest ranking guys possible, the PL and a couple privates and E4s, right?
They did. And so the really sad thing, Jack, about that is, I'm not a psychologist, but it's my belief from talking to all these guys that the majority of the PTSD, in Stephen's book, I think is a great a piece, if you want to understand what happened, to read what he wrote in it. The PTSD is more about the investigations and what happened to those guys. Because when they got back to Battalion, remember, Pat Tillman, the most famous soldier since, Elvis Presley, was killed. And they fucking killed him. And, to guys who are unwitting and who don't have the knowledge, they end up doing the chain of command's dirty work and, basically ostracizing and outcasting this platoon. You can read it in the book, my interviews with these guys. No one would talk to them. No one would look at them. They immediately began disintegrating. Guys, who weren't forced out of the regiment left because they couldn't take that ostracization and the guilt that came along with it. So on top of everything else, these guys became additional casualties. And because to a man, the guys I've talked to are incredible human beings. They do what incredible human beings do, and they take that responsibility. They know they didn't do it, but they can't explain why it wasn't their fault. But even though they can't, they still take responsibility because they were there, they fired, they should have known, and then they got to live with that. And as the months and years go on, the only way you can live with that is through a bottle, is through drugs, is through depression. And, that guilt adds up to PTSD. And, when I would talk to these guys, and, you can talk to Stephen about this, they'd be going along. I go, wait a minute. Did you read any of the investigations? No. Okay, let me tell you what was going on. Let me tell you what happened to set that up. And then I go through step by step and tell them. And then, I always ended up telling them, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You were put into a situation where you had no way to get out of it. You had no way to figure out what was happening. You did what you were trained to do. And unfortunately, you were put into a box that once you were in that box, by the time they came out of that canyon, you can watch that video that I referenced and then ask yourself, would I have fired? Because in the video, it's a reenactment. The Humvee comes around that last mini spur, looks up at the spur where the Afghan is in front of Pat Tillman, and they have a guy standing there, an Afghan role player, firing his weapon. You'll hear the weapon firing. It's an AK, firing away. You cannot see anything.
Yeah.
You have no idea what's up there. And so you have to ask yourself, would I have shot? And, when I ask myself, my answer is almost assuredly I would have shot. I can't.
And the army lied to the American public, and then they kicked these young men out of the regiment.
Yeah.
And told them that they were being released for standards.
Yeah. And ruined just, again, the casualties, Jack, are still occurring. Two of the guys still have suicidal thoughts. There's a number of them who can't work. They're in the prime of their life. They're in the prime of their earning life. These are, go back to what we started with. These are our, national treasure. These are patriots who signed up after 9/11, and that's where that contract comes in, and that's why accountability. There should be accountability, and we need to make it the standard for the future. Yeah, you can be a commander, you can be a general officer, but let me tell you, and you'll get all the accoutrement that comes along with that. But let me tell you something. Something else comes along with it. Accountability. You better make good decisions. You better be able to solve complex problems, or you're going to pay the price as you deserve to. And that needs to happen, because my suspicion is there's 100 more examples of this or more in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I've had a number of guys contact me. I've had Canadians contact me and say, hey, this was the most enlightening thing. I was in this firefight, this friendly firefight, and that's exactly what caused it too. It was a toxic chain of command. I've had guys from other units call and say the same thing. And, it's cathartic for them to hear this, but, the rest of us got to quit sticking our heads in the sand and start, accepting that toxicity has no place in the military. It needs to be the number one priority for eradication. When you see toxicity, it needs to be reported. You have a duty to report that. You have a duty to do something about it. And we got to weed these people out before they kill more of our national treasure.
That's the first aspect of it. But then in the aftermath of it, you have that the cover-up is worse than the incident itself.
Right.
That had they come out and said, we made mistakes and this is what really happened, this would have been a very different thing than had they lied about it for so long and tried to cover it up. And that's what, as you mentioned earlier, after you've been lied to once, it sets off this sort of perpetual feeling of like, well, what is the truth? Like, am I lying to you now? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, no, spot on. And, there's a moment in this that's, a huge crossroad. It's when Kevin Tillman, who's part of Serial 2, and, his best friend and his brother in arms and brother in blood, he finds out he's been killed. He's back at Salerno. He's flown back with the bodies and the injured platoon leader and RTO. And he's about to accompany Pat's body back to Bagram before it goes back to to Germany and then the States. And he's standing on the ramp of the helicopter, and the battalion commander and the S3 come up and talk to him. And they don't say anything about friendly fire. And this is 40 hours after the event. And everyone suspected immediately, and within 24 hours knew pretty much beyond a shadow of a doubt. Within 36 hours in the AAR, the squad leaders who did not shoot him were all taking responsibility for what happened. And so, in the initial hot wash, they knew that somehow they killed Pat Tillman. They could not describe it, but they knew it. So these guys know it, the battalion commander, the S3. And what do? They, in conjunction with the regimental commander, who they've already talked to and agreed, hey, don't tell Kevin, not yet, we don't know enough. They send him off without telling him everything they know. And all they had to do right there was go, Kevin, first off, there's nothing I could say that's going to assuage the sorrow that you have and, for the death of your brother, but I want you to know everything I know about what happened right now. The man next to your brother is convinced that he was killed by friendly fire. We don't know, because this was a massive, chaotic firefight. We won't be able to confirm that till we get the forensics back from the autopsy. But right now, we believe that Pat was killed in the crossfire between 01, 02 and the enemy. As soon as I get more information, I will call you and tell you what it is. And, good news, bad news doesn't get any better with age. The only thing that could happen right there was, Kevin would have gone, fuck. And if anyone could understand the chaos, it was Kevin Tillman. He was in the rear of Serial 2.
Right.
His primary weapon malfunctioned. His secondary weapon had its buttstock torn off by the wall of the canyon. So he was firing his 9mm in the canyon up at the enemy. He fired 8 rounds from a 9mm. So if anyone could understand the chaos of that moment, it would have been him. And instead, they didn't tell him. And, these are guys who love to quote the Ranger Creed, but I'm pretty sure there's a line in the Ranger Creed where a Ranger never lies to another Ranger. Mm-hmm. And so to me,
that's Robert Rogers' standing orders.
Yeah. So not telling Kevin right there is, to me, beyond comprehension. That's the moment. And if they'd done that, as soon as Kevin got back to Bagram, he got on the phone to his mom, Pat's wife, Marie. He would have told them, they wanted to know everything he knew, which he told them at the time, what he knew, which was the beginning of this fake story, about what happened. And so even he was unwittingly giving misinformation, but he would have been able right there to tell, his mom, Pat's wife, what really happened. And, they deserved that. They had every right to that knowledge, just like anyone else did. But they were deprived of it. And then somehow the chain of command thought it was a good idea to keep it secret for another 35 days. So, this adds to the problem. The platoon has internalized that they shot him, but they have no contact and communication with Kevin, so they can't tell him. They've been told. The one guy that flew back to accompany Kevin and the body, he was told, do not say anything about friendly fire till we get all the facts. And, it just went on and on, got worse and worse. And, 35 days turned into 35 months, turned into almost 20 years. Because, this book just came out. It's 19 years from when it happened. And the truth was always there. It was always in the guys. And, that's the added casualties. So these guys, there might be 1 or 2 guys who had PTSD from this, not 20 or
Right.
20 plus guys,
Right.
some who've had nervous breakdowns, blaming themselves, were not allowed access to the truth, the information, and like good soldiers took responsibility themselves and, had to live with that guilt and that frustration for almost 20 years.
Pete, we mentioned what happened to the PL and the enlisted that were on that. Has there ever been any blowback for the senior leadership that were not on the mission that created these conditions? Are they still getting promoted, or were they still getting promoted through the system?
Yeah. So the commanding general, the commanding general who was in charge of the investigation, the JSOC commander, had access to everything I had access to. So when you read those, you can pick one investigation, all except the one done by regimental headquarters. So you can pick any of the other three, and you can't read that without going, what the F, man? Who makes these decisions? You can't not come to the conclusion that this chain of command was toxic, and that these guys were put into a situation that there was no way to come out of other than, the luckiest of luck in happenstance. I mean, they were set up to fail right there. And, they didn't say anything. They had the same information. They didn't say anything about it. And to me, they went on. The JSOC commander became a 4-star general. The regimental commander became a 1-star. Battalion commander became a 2-star. So they were not just promoted once or twice, some 4 or 5 times. And yeah, there was no accountability on any of them. And, still to this day, what I would always, if I was to meet one of them face to face, I would say to him, okay, even if you claim somehow ignorance, how could you never check up on the rest of the guys in this platoon? Anyone who hears this story knows how devastating this was. Anyone who honestly understands Pat Tillman and his place in this platoon, and that he wasn't just admired, he was revered. And he was revered because he was a guy who was doing what all the rest of these guys did from all kinds of backgrounds. He had options. He had a multi-million-dollar contract. He gave it all up. And did he ever act condescending toward them? Did he ever act like he was superior? No. He would go out of his way to help anyone out there, to give them advice, to give them some water, some food. Again, Stephen Elliott's book, my favorite part of it is when he arrived in the regiment in 275, his first day, he's wandering through the battalion trying to find someone to tell him where to go, and he runs into Pat Tillman in the stairwell. And, Pat's like an E4 at the time, who normally would smoke the shit out of you. But Pat's like, hey, man, welcome to the battalion. Yeah, what do you need? Hey, stay in the stairwell. Come up, I'll show you where your room is. I'll get you in there so no one sees you, so you don't get smoked. I mean, when you read this, your admiration for the guy just skyrockets. He was the kind of leader we need in the military, caring, humble, all those things. And, yet we go and we treated these leaders treated this thing the way they did, and allowed this to happen. And unfortunately, it happened to a guy, who
Do we have questions?
epitomized everything good about our military.
Yeah. Do you see as I think that, we've read and we've talked about the idea that they're more like staff house flag officers. They're more generals now than there ever have been. And the number of officers and JSOC, at the staff level is incredible and stuff like that. Is there, obviously, officers are very important. Quality officers are very important. Officers make all the difference in those elements. But we also we'll bitch about
the treatment of officers versus enlisted a lot of times, in the sense of nobody's getting a Silver Star unless the officer gets a Silver Star, and that, you know, awards are often based on rank. And then we see times where these senior level officers can do no wrong, right? That their careers are not going to be inhibited by any mistakes they made. Do you see a solution for sort of bringing the officer corps, and not all officers, and I don't want to say this because a lot of officers are warfighters, but is there a solution to the admin officer, the political officer, to that kind of equation?
Yeah, I think it's cultural. You know, we have to change the culture, the way we look at it. To your point, in World War II, I believe there were four-star generals in the Army, and today there's 44. In World War II, we had, I don't know the exact number, I believe it was like 4 million soldiers. Today we have 425,000. So we definitely have too many general officers. You know, in 2002, 2003 in Afghanistan, you couldn't have the standard was no element can operate in Afghanistan unless it has a general officer in charge of it. And that's why, you know, my group, an Anaconda Shahi Coat, ended up with a 1-star Air Force general commanding us, because you had to have a general. And I think we need to culturally eradicate that idea and go in the opposite direction to power down. You know, history proves combat happens at the battalion level and below. I'm not saying brigade commanders aren't important, because they should be training battalions, but they're not the ones who should be running ops. And it should be company commanders, platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, and squad leaders who are making battlefield decisions. So this, again, one of the things that motivated me to memorialize it was as a historic lesson. We need to take this away. Our model is not the right model. If we're exporting that to Ukraine right now and these other places, then we're sabotaging them, because this is not the model. The CFT massive talk with, $1 million worth of 54-inch screens and computers running the whole thing. That's not the model. We need to go backwards to the guy on the hill, who can talk and who feels the cold, who feels the altitude, who feels the threat of the enemy, making the decisions. And so to me, it's a cultural thing, and culture happens from decisions you make. We need to make those decisions. We need to, make up our minds. We're never going to allow this to happen again. And also make it known to everyone that the reason that this thing went south, Afghanistan, was more to do with this command and control monstrosity we created than the enemy itself.
Thanks for that, Pete. It's very insightful. Okay, so questions. Cesar and Omen, thank you very much. Love the show. Thanks for making this happen. Has the guerrilla idea or something similar ever been used outside of Bosnia?
I don't know. I hope so. I'm sure plenty of other guys have similar ideas, but it's to me, it's disguises, deception, and diversion. That's what it's about. Any form that takes, contextually should be open. It should be open season, and that's what we need to train our future leaders to think out of the box, to not be constrained by the helicopter, the platoon, company, battalion, brigade model. Understand the problem and solve it in the most economical, efficient, and sensible way possible. And sometimes that involves dressing up like an ape.
Thanks again for the very generous donation, Cesar Oman. The Daily Mail ran a story that in early 2000s, the SAS was chosen over Delta for having more experience, was sent in to rescue a CIA agent in Afghanistan. Brit tabloids, so grain of salt. But do you have any thoughts on this?
In the year 2000?
That's in the early 2000s.
Oh, well, I mean, 2001 was, my frame of reference starts at 2001. We were along with the SF guys in the north, we were first in down in the dry lake beds south of Kandahar. I never heard of any mission like that. It was actually very difficult. The Brits were there, in our staging base, but they were given very restrictive guidance. They were only allowed, and remember, this is before anyone's on the ground, they were told they could only engage a target if it had to do with poppy production and heroin trafficking.
Wow.
So the SAS was, begging us to find a way to get them into the fight. And I don't know what happened there. Their commander, I didn't deal with them much after that, but their commander, when I went up to him and said, this doesn't make any sense, he was defending the anti-drug mission pretty vociferously. So
Of course.
yeah, I never heard of any other mission than that.
I also want to give a quick shout out to one of our audience members. You may remember Paul Cunningham. He was my first PL when I was in Ranger Battalion.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So good to see you again, Paul. Hope you're doing well, buddy. Radioactive Llama, thank you very much. Great content, guys. Better than watching primetime TV. Well, we should hope so.
Good job, guys.
We need that primetime TV moolah, though. Mike,
you're gonna get it.
Thanks for your support, Pete. Mike Montgomery, thank you very much. Question: what was the conventional wisdom regarding Los Pepes while he was in Colombia hunting Escobar?
Like conventional wisdom, I mean, the conventional wisdom was what they were doing was, what should have been done. That was to my knowledge, and I was probably as close to it as any American, me and my guys. There were all kinds of CIA takes on who the Los Pepes were, DEA. So remember, those two were kind of in charge of the mission down there and battling each other all the time. We were down there, walking this fine line between them. We didn't care who got credit for anything. The Los Pepes to me was an uprising. It was Colombians, police officers, their members of their federal law enforcement and their military who off duty were getting together going, hey, the government's not going to stop this. The only way is for us to stop this, and we've got to take these guys out ourselves. And the Los Pepes did just that. And they, of all the things that brought Escobar to his knees, I believe the Los Pepes was probably the most formidable. They took out a number of his lieutenants. He did not feel safe. His family was not safe. And so he took all kinds of measures to get them safe. And ultimately, those measures are what ended up getting him captured. So the Los Pepes to me was just an organic uprising of people who had had enough of this guy blowing the shit out of airplanes, blowing up, cars in the middle of huge intersections, assassinating police officers by the hundreds. And they took matters in their own hand and were very effective.
Sefsar Omen, thank you again. Were there Delta snipers on Overwatch when they took out Escobar? What are your thoughts on Mark Bowden's theory it was a unit bullet that killed him? I
didn't know that was Mark Bowden's theory, but and normally I would not comment, so the fact that I'm commenting should tell you that it wasn't our snipers, and I've already said it. People who deny that the Colombians accomplished that on their own are people who, just cannot believe that other countries have freedom-loving, warriors that can be just as effective when motivated as we are, and that's what happened there. There was no snipers, there was no unit guys anywhere near there at the time, and anyone else who claims there was is just engaging in theory and trying to guess what happened and make it a little sexier than it really was.
Joe's gotcha. Thank you very much. Would you happen to know the origin of advanced force operations? Did that concept come from Dick Meadows when he went into Iran in 1980 ahead of the Delta Force or the Delta Rescue Force?
Yeah, so since, I was the first AFO commander, I would just say it rose up organically. It was just common sense. We didn't even care. You could have called us soap dish, and it would have been this. We would have done the same thing. We were before that. Advanced force operation was a verb, not a noun.
Right.
And so it just meant going in ahead of the main effort and prepping the battlefield. And for clandestine ops, that means setting up safe houses, getting vehicles, doing, low-vis recce's so that when the guys come in, you can, greet them, tell them the lay of the land. They have resources so they can operate. We turned it into a noun. We just called ourselves AFO. We were a conglomeration of all four services and some other government agency guys. So it was, necessity is the mother of invention, and common sense is the father. And that's what, that's how AFO was born, out of necessity and common sense.
You mentioned Colombia, and then we talk about Bosnia. You talk about like the CIA and the DEA, who both had a lot of undercover sort of cover type work. And then in Bosnia, did you guys have a good working relationship with like the CIA, the DIA, other intel units, INSCOM and whatnot, where you weren't like creating this stuff, you weren't reinventing the wheel, but people were there kind of teaching you guys how to do this stuff?
We had a great relationship after 9/11 with the CIA, and that again was born out of Bosnia. We had worked with them extensively in Bosnia, and so we knew each other, and many of the personalities knew each other. In my book, I talk about a guy codenamed Spider. He was a very good friend of mine. We had operated together in Bosnia multiple times, along with other guys in the unit. He was a warrior, former Marine. We trusted him. He trusted us. We shared information, even information people were telling us not to share. And, so that relationship worked because of personal relationships. And it stayed that way. Afghanistan, the early phases, all the way to Iraq. He was in Iraq. He came up from the south. I came from the west and the north. We ended up meeting in Baghdad International Airport right before the other event I talked about. So it was a good relationship, and it's always emphasized to maintain those relationships and to make sure that they flourish. But they're very personality dependent, and so when you get someone in there who doesn't like, whether it's an agency guy who doesn't like the Army or the Navy or vice versa, then that relationship falters.
Seth Sarnoman, thank you very much. Were there any other noteworthy innovations that came from the unit that you can talk about during your time or after, other than the police spike mats?
Well, dogs. We brought dogs. Operational dogs. A lot of people don't know this. Operational dogs were the use of operational dogs was ended at the end of the Vietnam War. So I think that was 75. From 75 to 98, there were no operational dogs in the military. There were drug sniffing dogs, right? Everyone remembers the, drug sniffing dogs. There were bomb sniffing dogs the MPs had. There were no operational dogs. Back to Dale Comstock. Dale Comstock was a dog trainer, and when he was in my troop, he had a number of, and I forget what kind of shepherds they were, but he had me out to his house, showed me these dogs, and he was like a lot of guys in the unit. They were saying, "Hey, we should get dogs. Look at all these things they could do." And so they planted that seed in my brain. When I became a squadron commander, I had in my squadron, I had one guy who had been classically trained at Lackland Air Force Base. He was certified dog trainer. And I had two guys who were just kind of like amateurs. We did a brainstorming session. One of the big missions at the time was underground tunnels. And it was pretty obvious that, dogs would make an incredible impact on that mission. So we flew out to Lackland Air Force Base, met with the colonel who was in charge of dog training. And again, no one gave us approval for this. We just did it. And we told him our concept. And he was a historical believer in dogs. He was like, finally, somebody sees the light. He goes, "Hey, we'll support you guys, whatever you need." And we had to get approval from him because in the DA-PAM, you can't have dogs unless Lackland, the dog command at Lackland says you can have them. So he signed off on it. My unit commander, Gary Harrell, fantastic guy, just recently passed away. He saw the potential in it too. He said, "Do it." It sounds kind of crazy, but go ahead and do it. So a week later, we flew two guys off to Belgium, bought two of the finest Belgian Malinois that money could buy, began the training process. And it was a process of discovery. Who's going to handle these dogs? If you bring in a dog handler, he's going to take a seat on a little bird, take a seat in a vehicle. What about small missions? And we quickly concluded that we needed to make operators dog handlers. And this was a controversial decision. There were a number of people, even in the unit, who thought it was heresy, but we did it anyway. Went off to dog handling school, got some proof of concepts done. Right away, you could see the potential of these animals. And we got money to build kennels. And like I said, that was 98. It took a while. The program was not solid. We went to Afghanistan. We took the dogs with us, but there were no specific uses immediately. Then Iraq happened, 2003. We took the dogs with us. We infilled with dogs. We had special vehicles that had air conditioners built into them because dogs are very heat sensitive. They were worth their weight in gold. As think about setting up a patrol base, a hide site in the desert. If you've got dogs that can detect by smell and hearing anyone, 500 meters away, that's an amazing force multiplier. And they were, but they made their mark back at our safe house. Once we got established in our safe house, once the country fell, we had a weird, I don't know if it was a suicidal attack. Two guys came in, AKs got into the perimeter. We had a big compound, and we released the dogs. Those were the first, that was the first operational use of the dogs. I was there. I remember running up. All I could hear was gurgling, and there was a guy laying there, an AK-47 5 feet away, and his face was in the Belgian Malinois' mouth. Oh, it was Arco, and he was, and that was the gurgling. And from that point on, it was dogs were on every raid. The first 2 dog casualties happened on the Uday and Qusay raid. Uday and Qusay were Saddam's sons. They were barricaded on the second floor of the house they were hiding in. The team went in, cleared the first floor, came to the stairwell, went up 2 steps, fuselage of automatic AK fire just pounded the top of the steps. They released the 2 dogs. 2 dogs went up there. They could hear them. They could hear the dogs make contact with Uday and Qusay. The team followed after, finished them off. And one of those dogs was the first casualty. He was hit by an AK round when he got to the top of the stairs. But again, another example in CQB, if you can have a dog, move through these, fire funnels and to tell you whether there's an enemy there, they're worth their weight in gold. And they were. And today, everyone has them. We probably got more dogs than we can handle in the military, but they've got their place, and we should keep them there because they're an invaluable asset.
Yeah, and those Malinois, they're no joke. Like, they are so courageous, and
yes,
they're fearless.
Yeah, very loyal. A lot of breakthroughs in training. Like, I was skeptical that, when you walk around one of those things, it's like walking around a minefield or a hand grenade with its pin pulled out and the spoon still in. No matter how comfortable you are with dogs, it'll shake you. But these guys train these dogs. They acclimated them to the squadron, and you could walk through the squadron, through our bar area, and they knew they were one of the team, and that did a lot for building trust of everybody. But it was a training breakthrough because up to that time, dogs were, just the handler, and no one else could be around them.
Yeah. I think that we have another mutual from 275, Kelly, who was very involved in the dog program, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Nation Wood, thank you very much for the donation. Clayton Jensen, good to see you, buddy. If you haven't watched Clayton's show, you should watch it. He caveats this question. He says, no specifics needed, just your overall opinion. And then he says, you touched on SIGINT stuff used in Colombia, etc. What do you think about the evolution of the IO guys, Ranger OST, and JSOC Sade's over time?
Well, the evolution is just natural. They learn as they go along. They become, more mission focused. And, that's the key with all that electronic intelligence. You got to get it down in the hands of the operators. You got to test it out. You got to give it proof of concept. And if that all works, you can share it with larger groups.
Gene Colley, thank you very much. And this is the last question.
Guys, let me shut something real quick.
Yeah,
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Any plans to bring back the operational donkey like Merrill's Marauders had in Burma?
Well, they did bring them back in Afghanistan. The pack mules.
I mean, SF was experimenting with them even before 911. One of the teams in Shahi Coat thought, hey, the way to get our equipment up into the mountains is with the donkey. And I have a video of it. It's it's the team and me and two others chasing this donkey, trying to corral it to see if we could use it. And it turns into just, a Keystone Cop moment of hilarity. We're laughing so hard we can't even chase it anymore. And that's when we gave up on the donkey idea. But I think it still has potential. All ideas like that. I know they're trying to create robots now to carry equipment into difficult terrain, but I think that's a long way off. And if the situation's right, and you've got a well-trained donkey and a guy who's handled donkeys before, I don't see why you wouldn't use it.
And that's it. Dee, did we have anything on Patreon?
No. So actually the next episode is not going to be Friday. It's going to be Saturday, and we're going to have John Dovey on the show, served in the SADF and then SANDF. Really excited to talk to him. It's going to be a very unique interview. Pete, thank you for coming on the show, spending your Friday evening with us. And again, his latest book is Common Sense Leadership Matters, Toxic Leadership Destroys, a Case Study, Book 3. I hope you guys will go and check it out.
And also the Mission, the Men and Me, and then
Common Sense Way.
The Common Sense Way, right? Yep. So, and it's a trilogy, right? In the sense that it all focuses around the idea of leadership, both positive leadership and toxic leadership.
Yeah, just common sense leadership applied using military stories, real world military stories, and the last one brings up the toxic leadership destroys point in it.
Perfect.
And yeah, Pete, I'd love to have you back sometime, talk about the rest of your career and anything else. We'll have to do it again sometime, but thank you for coming on and doing the show tonight.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too, guys. You got a great show, and keep up the good work.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And before we roll out, anything else you want to plug? Websites, anything else people should go check out? Where can they find you?
Yeah, on that book, there's a lot of good stuff. Pictures of the spur. You can see, the view that I described of the squad leader and the lead gun jeep looking up at the spur. They're colored pictures. It's on PeteBlaber.com, and you can watch the video on firefight.peteblaber.com. I would recommend anybody who is interested in not just that event, but driving off road or terrain to go watch that video. It's pretty amazing. And I also have the maps on there that lay out the sequence of events leading up to the firefight. So check it out and enjoy the terrain while you're checking it out.
All right. Thank you. And we will see all of you next Saturday. Thank you. And Pete, we'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good, Jack. Thanks, guys.
Man.
Thanks, Dave.
Take care. Have a good night.
You too.